Sorry.
Things get filled in by.
6:30, I'll call this special meeting of the Enfield Town Council, Monday, April 23rd, 2017, to order. Roll call, please.
Counselor Arnone.
Here.
Counselor Gonsalves.
Here.
Counselor Song. Counselor Song.
Here.
Counselor Davis.
Here.
Counselor Denny.
Here.
Counselor Falls. Mayor Wetzel.
Here.
Counselor Mullen.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Suzanne.
Here.
Counselor Ungar.
Here.
There's 9 members present, 2 are absent.
I'll sit down here so I don't sneeze on anybody. I have a little bit of a cold, so I'll stay over here.
Uh-oh, quarantine.
Yeah. Item number 2, budget discussion. Item A, EMS. Gary and your team, please. Brian, what page is that on in the general?
Yeah, I like the little book.
I do too.
I know it's all the way to back in the big book, but in the little book.
625.
What book?
145.
Little book?
We got tabs.
145.
We got tabs in
You
one.
got tabs in a big book,
Yeah.
There it is.
It's all the way to back in the big book.
Way back, yeah.
way back.
Welcome, sir.
Good evening.
How you doing?
Excellent, thanks. So a
Floor's
little,
yours. Welcome.
thank you. So a little departure this evening. Captain Riggett is going to deliver the budget news tonight.
If that's okay.
That's great.
She always has good news.
All right, thanks. I appreciate
Welcome.
the opportunity.
Welcome.
Thanks. So I know we're doing things a little bit differently this year than in past years, but just quickly, I'll give you a kind of brief overview of our past calendar year. We've been busy. Our call volume is up about 10%. We're doing about 7,500 calls a year. We were doing about 6,800. So that's a significant increase. We have 28 full-time spots staff. 25 are filled currently. We're holding a few of those for the budget. Just kind of, we are busier for, I think, several reasons. Urgent care is now in town and established. We never had an urgent care before the past couple years. That brings a lot of people to town to seek medical treatment, and sometimes, urgent care can't handle it and we get called. That's one of the reasons. Healthcare has changed. People who need hospitalization are generally sometimes not admitted or discharged too quickly, so we're going back and visiting people that probably should have been in the hospital or kept in the hospital a bit longer. I guess we can dive into the numbers unless you want.
Well,
A
you're,
more
you're,
overview?
yeah, we'll give you the floor, and if you,
Okay.
unless you want to open up the question and answer, but we'll certainly let you highlight anything you'd like to.
All right. So we've stayed pretty much flat, actually reduced our budget where we can. Just one, if you look at page 147, the annual budget personnel detail, I just want to point out there is an error. The 29 employees should be 28. We should have 2 EMT tier 1s, not 3. That is my error. Other than that, we can go through personnel, but a few noted decreases to the budget. If you're looking at page 146, you will see compared to this year, 2018 to proposed 2019, we had a reduction in professional development costs. We've had a reduction in our health services and what appears to be an increase in our technological services line. So the professional development, that's going for employee classes and mandatory training. We were able to scale that back. We do some of our training in-house. We've essentially eliminated elective courses for staff with budget concerns. Health services, again, that is reduced from 2018 to 2019. Again, moving more things in-house and not using vendors for certain aspects of,
Ongoing monitoring.
yeah, employee ongoing monitoring. We do fit testing with masks for respiratory protection. We'll be doing that in-house, and that's a huge savings. And then technological services, it looks like it's gone up substantially. You'll see it looks like it's gone up about $8,000. It really hasn't. We've just kind of shifted some things around in the budget to better reflect where they should be located. So we moved some stuff from other purchased services, and we moved some stuff from the other equipment line. That's where that difference is coming from. So our radios will now be in technological services. That makes sense. Our iPad data that we use for patient charting is now out of technological services. Small things like that. Other than that, we are relatively flat or reduced, other than salaries, of course, COLA increases. So we generally, right now, we have less employees, running more calls, being busy. You want to add anything?
No, not really. I think you covered the highlights with that. So,
But
Very good.
please, if you have questions, yeah.
Any questions? Counselor Arnone, then Counselor Bosco.
So on billing, and we always go through the billing portion,
Yeah,
the
we can do
billing
that.
that we actually recover and the billing that we don't. And I know every year you're trying to work harder and harder to close that gap. Is to be funding itself through billing, which will never happen, but could you give us just a few words on that for everybody here too that is?
Yeah, so if you look at page 145, the revenue summary, that's what we are anticipating recovering for 2019, 2.4 million. It's always kind of a guesstimate. If we stay as busy as we are, I would assume we will be bringing in a little bit more.
And to get to that number, Captain, how much do we have to actually bill in total services, right? I mean, there's a percentage that we write off.
You know, I don't know that number
Well,
off the top of my head.
with 100% billing, there's a few aspects to that. One, we recoup on Medicare, which is now there's been a shift. It had been when I initially started here, third-party payers were the majority. Medicare was secondary payer. Now Medicare is the #1 payer, and they don't pay 100%. So we capture about 60% of what we bill, and we bill the state rate. And if any of you are interested, I can certainly give you the state rate. We have that hanging up. Another piece of that is that we've got probably, and I'm looking to John to see if his memory jogs, probably about 15%, or 10 to 15% of folks that we bill and we just never recover. We have the billing agent do the best they can, but people either lie to us with, fake name, fake address, they're not able to capture for us, or folks just simply ignore the bill, and as best as the agent goes after them, they're not always able to capture that. So that probably explains some of the disparity, the $600,000.
Right, and just so everyone knows, that's a tough run. And so now, the opiate crisis, so now are you taking accounting of what that's costing us for future, if there's ever funding in the future to help offset some of the amount of man hours and like say the calls, or that has to be a large portion of the calls that are coming in?
So
Surprisingly,
it's a problem. We are busier with the opiate crisis, but that 10% increase, we've seen a steady 10% across kind of all categories. That's not all just in the opiate crisis.
So we are tracking it though, so in
Very
case
much,
of some
yeah,
future
very much.
funding comes available, that we're able to show the state, federal government, whichever it's coming from, that this is what it's costing our community.
Yes.
Exactly.
And we
And-
participate in, there is Narcan rebates that are available. We do participate in that. We get some money back for that. Narcan obviously has gone up in cost, supply and demand. But yeah, we monitor that pretty closely.
Thank you.
All set, Tom? Counselor Bosco, and
So-
Deputy Mayor Seaver.
Excuse me, so what is the deficit we're running in now for money?
About $630,000.
633.
No, it's not good either.
It's down though, right? Is that down?
We're down.
Considerably, right?
Down from last.
I think it was
Now,
up.
783.
I know you said you were trying to do something to maybe build some revenue. We looking into anything like that?
Mobile integrated health.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a newer concept, new to Connecticut, it's not new in other parts of the country, called mobile integrated healthcare, or community paramedicine, where paramedics work outside of the 911 system, doing a whole variety of things. They can contract with hospitals to check on their patients that they've discharged. There's a bunch of different programs. Right now in Connecticut, we cannot do that. We cannot, it's not in legislation. We can't operate outside of the 911 system. They're actively working on it. They're trying to figure out changes to regulations, whether it will be beneficial. We think it'll be beneficial, and that we just need to show that it'll be beneficial, primarily to Medicaid and Medicare is where they're trying to show a huge savings. Last I heard, there should be a report to the state January 2019 with some sort of guidance. If we get the go-ahead, we would like to fully explore that. We think we've got a good community to participate in either an actual program or a pilot program if that's the way they decide to go. But if anything, we would like to see cost savings. We might not be able to capture more, we could be able to save a bit more. We're not quite sure yet.
And I'd like to just chime in on that a little bit and blow the trumpet for Captain Riggett, because since they started this discussion, and it's become a subcommittee of the EMS Advisory Board, she's been actively involved. So she's the secretary for that task force. So she's right there at the forefront. And I filled in her position when she was on vacation last month. And the committee looks at different communities and how they're structured, the type of EMS system that provides for the community, and the interplay with the local government and the provider. And they look at Enfield as one of the idyllic situations where mobile integrated healthcare, when it's allowed, would be a very good fit. And I absolutely believe that too. And as Captain Riggett says, we may not see a huge revenue capture, but we could reduce our expenditure with that. So we're hopeful. So not yet, but coming.
And there's nothing more we can do to collect some of this debt? I mean, I'm not saying let's chase down an elderly person and threaten them, like, you know, the reason why it happened, because the way the other ambulance was here, AMR, before. But, you know, if someone has something, a few more demand letters or maybe some threats to court or whatever, with something to say, if you don't have something, you know, show us the proof and we can do something. Because like you said, there's a lot of people just don't wanna pay it. They can pay it.
We
They
had,
don't wanna pay it.
We've been talking about more aggressive billing options, and we'd obviously need to kind of explore different options, taking people to collections, if that's a route
Myself,
that
I
you
would,
wanted
I
to
would
go.
like to see something come in front of us. Yeah, we don't mean we gotta take it, but, you know, at least see, cause $600,000, even though it came down, is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think that all the taxpayers should be paying all that much, and they are. Especially, you know, if someone can afford something. again, if someone doesn't have anything, you're not gonna get blood from a stone. But if someone has something, although you may try with a different type of needle. But, we really should be doing whatever we can to recapture, other than maybe putting liens on their properties or something like that, cause, I don't wanna see it go that far, but I would like to see it pushed to the limit.
I'll say that the folks on this side of the table agree with you
Yes.
100%. Recently, Mr. Wilcox, Aaron and myself met with our billing agent to go over what they could do. And so we're waiting for a few things back from them on the level, I guess the
I'm sure your
term would be
billing
the
agent would
level.
like it too. Or does he pay on gross, or does he pay
No,
on
no,
what's
no,
collected?
on
What's collected.
What's collected.
Yeah, just what's collected.
I was like, I'm telling, it was a big difference. I mean, you guys came in, you're really good to the community, you saved people money, cause AMR was just, it was terrible when it was private. They couldn't forgive any debt. We had a whole bunch of elderly people crying because they couldn't get rid of their,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
why we did that when we did, but there's still people that can, and they have the ability. And, even if you get 50 cents on the dollar out of them, 25 cents on the dollar, it's still better than nothing. So that's just really where I would just like to see a little more aggressive billing, and I'd like to see it come in front of us and, and not to say that we're gonna do it, but at least we have the option and we can show the public that, look, this is why we're not gonna do it. I wanna see the pros and the cons. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Suzak.
I guess I just have two questions. One, you said you're up 10% and some of it's due to the urgent care. Is that basically Enfield residents going to urgent care or local surrounding communities? And I guess the second thing is that when we do, respond to an opiate overdose and we do administer, and then they refuse transport, I really understand patient rights, but are we able to bill them for all our services?
So I'll answer first question on
Sure,
urgent care.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's both. I'd say it's a fair mix of Enfield residents and then surrounding communities. So East Windsor, we've had people get off airplanes, and urgent care is the closest one to Windsor Locks. But it does bring in people from the small Suffield, Summers, surrounding communities. We have another one coming to town too, if you're aware, that's gonna go into the Stop and Shop Plaza. So twice the fun. And then Narcan, and the opiates. So we can bill certain treat and release. It's whether the insurance company will pay it. Generally, the answer is no. Blue Cross, Anthem Blue
Anthem.
Cross, is now in Connecticut reimbursing for, it's called treat and release.
Treat and release.
Treat and release. Most insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare, do not, unfortunately.
For me, how do we get people who have overdosed the help they need if we're treating and releasing?
I agree.
They need to be in a program.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that
frustrating.
it is frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're with you, not against you.
Yeah.
With that.
We try. We will stay with these people for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, trying to debate with them. But at the end of the day, it's their
They have
right.
patients' rights.
It's their right. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Counselor Fall.
The non-911 services, I'm not sure exactly what that is, or whether it might require additional staff, or are you gonna do it with existing staff? How do you handle that?
I don't know, because I don't know what the mobile integrated healthcare, that's what you're talking about, the commute. It's a great question that I don't know the answer to yet. It will be dependent on what the state allows. Right now, they are looking at programs to allow us to bring patients to places other than emergency rooms. So transporting somebody to urgent care instead of taking them away. We can't do that right now. If that's the case, no, we would be able to run it with the staff that we have. If we're looking at more expansive programs like contracting with hospitals to follow up on their patients, yeah, we would probably need to add staff. But I don't know.
If you were to do that, you're saying that the revenue would exceed the cost?
Yeah, we'd have to, yeah. And then hopefully the payer, like in a program like that, would be the hospital. Because hospitals get fees every time they do readmissions and that thing, so
Yep.
it's beneficial for them as well.
When you have people that get sick or go on vacation, how do you cover for them?
Yeah, we do a lot of employee shifting. We have part-time staff, so we've got probably 10 part-time staff, 5 paramedics, 5 EMTs that cover in sick vacation time. Occasionally we have to use overtime. Occasionally one of our paramedic supervisors will cover in their spot. We will try to utilize everything, overtime being kind of the last option.
Yeah. I know I've lived in town for a long time, and I happen to be associated with the Enfield Fire Department, and I know they ran the ambulance program many, many years ago before it became a town-run organization that you have today. So a lot of those services are still there. I don't know if we're able to capture some of those services to help hold our costs down or not. Has there been any discussion about that?
As in utilizing
Fire
staff
department
together?
staff, yes. Obviously, they're different union,
Yeah, so
different pay
yeah,
scales, what have you.
we do work together closely. They do respond to a lot of the same calls that we do. They will transport with us, but we have not looked at sharing staff. Do you have anything to add?
No.
It just seems like it's a resource that, in my mind, isn't being fully utilized, that could be. So I would hope sometime in the future that we might have further discussions and follow up to some possibilities that might help.
Agreed.
Thank you. Yep.
Councilman Bosco.
With the billing, are we regulated?
I'm sorry.
Billing, are we regulated by the state on how much we charge?
Yes.
Is every ambulance the same price as every ambulance, or you gotta petition them for what your rates are?
There's a set rate. If you wanted to go higher than the set rate, you really have to, it's a pretty detailed application of why you'd want to go higher
And
what the need is for.
ambulances around us, are we competitive with them? Are we cheaper than them? Are we more expensive with them?
I'd say comparable.
Yeah, I think most of them are using the state rate. Again, I don't know what I believe like AMR is not, but I think most of the surrounding services do use the state issued rate.
Would it be worth trying to petition them for an increase? I mean, you know, it's a $600,000 deficit is a big deficit. I mean, I know we can charge all we want, we're still gonna get the same for Medicaid and probably Medicare.
Right.
But, you know, with the private insurance, you know, we may be able to get some more to close up that deficit. And if AMR is getting it, we should be able to get it.
I don't know that AMR is getting it so much from the standpoint that AMR is not soft billing. And
Well,
so,
and that's why I asked what the rates were. If everyone's charging the same rate, everyone's charging the same rate. But if there's others out there getting a lot more,
Right, I think if before we got to that, we would have to do aggressive billing, not waiving anything,
right.
collections. There is some tools that the billing company is going to start using. I think they've just started using them that are kind of cool. A lot of people now have like high deductible HSA. So our billing agent has a program that monitors people's HSAs, so they will hold the bill until the person's HSA has been met, or their high deductible plan's been met, and then they'll release the bill. So
Well,
we
and
will
see,
be
to me-
guaranteed money, so I'm hoping that we'll see a big increase with that.
To me, if that's the case, them are the ones we need to do aggressive billing on. if I chose a high deductible, that's my problem. People get in accidents all the time, they have $1,000 deductible. I'm sorry, you gotta pay the $1,000 deductible. I can't take it out of my pocket and do the job at a loss.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be either. So if someone has I'm sorry, they got a $10,000 deductible and the ambulance rides $1,000, I'm sorry, man, but,
Yeah, so they're holding those bills.
right, but if
And
they
then the
never get to
hospital,
that.
the hospital bill, and usually if you're going to the ER, you're probably gonna meet
But if they
your
don't get there,
deductible,
we
hopefully.
should be aggressively chasing them, because they chose the higher deductible. And it's not us that should be footing their bill. It's just, I don't wanna sound rotten and all that, but, we all do choose what we have. Especially when it comes to, like you said, deductibles and stuff like that, and if you feel you wanna gamble with a $10,000 deductible, town of Enfield shouldn't be a partner in paying your bill off.
Yeah, I don't disagree or agree. We would
They
follow
can probably
your
the
guidance.
deductibles on all of them, not just people with HSAs.
Right.
Because what she's
Right.
saying is the collector is looking for when that deductible's met,
Correct.
the next bill's gonna be paid automatically by the insurance company.
So it gets held until they,
Right, so
that-
they're,
Right,
so
but it
they're
still
waiting.
shouldn't matter if the person,
yeah.
if they have a high deductible and the ambulance ride doesn't cover it, them should be aggressively seen. Because, like I said, they chose the deductible they picked. And then the next question is I'm sure, we don't have the license to be able to pick up at nursing homes and stuff like that. What is involved in trying to get that license?
Me or you?
Yeah, you can answer that, because I know you've looked into that before.
Number one, you have to show a need, and then you petition the state. Happy to do that, but the bottom line is that AMR, ASM that service, say Parkway Pavilion, and some of the other, they service Blair Manor when Blair was up and running. You have to show that they're not doing the job. And you have to prove it. And then they have the ability to come into the hearing and say, no, they're taking business away from us. How dare they do that? And they throw everything they can.
So
to
more or less
block
their
something like
license
that.
locks out, it's like taxi cabs.
Yes.
Once you have a livery license, you can stop
So one of
other
the,
people.
one of the things that I've actively worked on for the last 3 years is to level that playing field. So you don't have a certified
Certified or
service
licensed,
like
yeah.
us versus a licensed service like the commercials. Let's all be the same. And then if we're able to do that, then we could certainly do those types of calls. And we'd be glad to do those calls. And we could adjust our service accordingly.
Well, the big thing is you're looked into it, or you're looking into it, and please don't lose sight of it when time comes, because, that could be a revenue getter and
Yeah,
help us out.
definitely.
I'm all set, thank you.
Councilor Arnott.
So, a lot of people really don't have a choice in their health care. And this problem with these health deductibles, because now the insurance companies, have shifted the burden onto the individuals. So unfortunately, they're the ones that are responsible for that deductible, and when you go after them, now you're going after, personal people. But I just, that's a new world now, and a lot of people, I've seen a lot of these $10,000 deductibles, and it's bankrupting people, so it's a tough decision to have to go back at your, and bill. And on the fire department, so this is gonna start coming up in the future conversations, sharing services, but I just don't see that as a really great option, because you have the fire departments are their own tax district, they're their own governments. So you're billing government back to government, you're not gonna go do a fire call, but they can probably assist in a medical call. But they're really two separate entities, and, it's which pocket you're gonna pull the tax dollar out of. So they may be able to help us, but that's not helping the people in the tax district of that fire department, because now their resources are helping us out for the whole good. And sorry, folks, but I think that someday, one fire department, one EMS would be the way to go. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Suzak.
Mike, I'm gonna have to defend you and the insurance companies. When you go to a higher deductible, all of us who buy insurance and buy large plans and go out on the market, If you change, and do the math simple, if you go from 1,000 to 2,000, your premiums over that year drop by $1,000. So I would advise anybody out there that's considering changing their deductible, that savings you're gonna get in your premium is gonna be equal to that increase. So by all means, put that away so you can pay your deductible.
Fair point.
That's how it works.
No
Fair-
arguments
fair
there,
point.
no arguments there. If
So-
that's the
sounds like an
case,
underwriter.
if you're out there doing your own underwriting, but most people aren't. They're-
It's
the
true no
businesses
matter
aren't.
what, and just that the people who actually purchase the insurance for small businesses, this is glaring and we see it. And a lot of times what small businesses do is they throw that money in the HSA because I like to gamble on people being healthy.
Any other questions? I have a question, just a scenarios, and please just, if I indulge me, so say a kid gets hurt at one of our schools, or during a sporting event. Who responds to that call?
Enfield EMS.
So, I guess the question is, if it's at Enfield High, is there any sort of procedures that take, so I'm just curious, is that event and the kid got hurt, and it took a long time for us to get there. Just curious, they were saying that they had to connect, I don't know, there was some, you had to clear, I don't know if there's a procedure involved with, I'm just curious, it took, they're a long time, and we were right up the hill.
Yeah, so, I mean, we could have been, just because we're, like, stationed at 1296 Enfield Street,
Yeah.
our ambulances are usually not there. They're
Okay,
driving back
but
from
you guys would be the ones that respond.
Johnson, Hartford, yeah.
Okay.
We do use mutual aid if we've got 4 ambulances on and 5 calls come in, we will bring in
Alright.
help from one of the surrounding communities. It could have been that, it could have been that we were responding from,
No, just curious, I was just
somewhere
wondering,
else,
not
yeah.
putting you on a spot. So, on a deficit, I'd like to understand what's causing it. So what is the main, for me to be able to address it, to assault, could we get an idea of what the breakdown, what is causing it? Is it people who have insurance not paying you? Is it Medicaid not reimbursing you for the cost? Is it Medicare not, just having an idea, and then, hopefully then we can, through the billing company, have a plan to start going after it.
yeah.
And I think that's for understanding where the biggest issue lies, for me, then we can hopefully put a plan together. Cause I agree, we can't live with $600,000 every year, even if it's for a well-intentioned service. Especially, but if it's also something we can't solve, cause you mentioned urgent care, guess what? You're gonna see more urgent cares open in the next, even more so in the next 5 to 6 years. We're moving away from the facilities to the community care based, to approach. So if we're already kinda struggling with
Yeah.
the urgent cares that we have, it's gonna get worse. Meaning there's gonna be more urgent cares opening, cause in theory, it's supposed to deliver costs cheaper. That's the whole theory with the urgent cares, but I'm sorry, but I don't know if
No,
there's.
no, that's okay.
Yeah.
Our primary payers,
Could we,
Medicare
could we
and-
get a breakdown? You don't have to tell me now, but maybe after
We-
this, just break down what we estimate.
So, right, so the short version is that we just don't charge enough for the service, okay? That's the bottom line. The taxes aren't there just to provide the service. The taxes exist to ensure that the service is available on demand. So that's an issue that we struggle with industry-wide. This is an issue that we've grappled with in every one of my former, professional lives, is that the revenue we bring in from billing does not cover the full expense of the service provided. And that's because the taxes exist to make sure that the service is available on demand. And the price difference goes up when you have demand for the service. And so what happens is, like most communities, we recognize that there are certain individuals within our community, mostly seniors, who are on a fixed income. They have the highest demand for the service, but they have the least ability to pay for the service.
So I guess that's what I'd like to see. What's the breakdown? That's all I'm asking. I'm
Sure.
not questioning, I'm just asking the breakdown, so then maybe we can solve it.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
the point. When we're talking about solving the deficit, I don't know maybe it is folks can't pay, and that's the
Right.
biggest thing. So that's fine. I was just asking if I understood that. I wasn't questioning whether, they're not running their service correctly. But I think that's the point. I need to understand it first. So
Yeah,
then
we
maybe
can-
we can have a plan together, where at least even if we dent it, maybe we're not gonna get rid of 600,000 because we are providing care for folks who can't afford it, but maybe there's other ways, maybe we cut it in half. 200,000 is still a nice little chunk of change we could put in our budget.
we
For
can
example.
we can pull like the Medicaid and Medicare is our biggest payer. they don't pay very much, just because we're allowed to bill
Right.
$1,000. We're not getting that from Medicare or Medicaid. So we can pull those numbers of what,
So, we have some folks who are Six Sigma certified. So are they allowed to actually help with other areas of the departments to help them with some of these things on process and things where we can improve? Or are they just within their departments?
So there's nothing that would prohibit that other than, again, our ability to assume more capacity of work in the organization, which we're not in a position to do
I guess-
in almost all
Yeah, at
areas.
some point, I know it's not for these folks, I'd like to see a breakdown of what they actually, if they're doing anything, if they, meaning what they've actually identified as a process improvement, and if we've been able to implement in any department, whether it may be.
Sure.
That'd be great to see, because that's the point of getting Six Sigma certified. And if we have folks who can do that, there's an untapped resource maybe that we could use to help, again, maybe come up with a process for another department to help, with a deficit situation.
And that's a great point, if I
Yeah.
may speak.
Yeah,
to
go right
that.
ahead, yeah.
That we did look at our process, and one of the things that we did was with an upgrade to our EMS documentation piece, and working with our billing agent, we were able to identify certain little key elements to put in there that increases their turnaround time, which also increases our reimbursement time. So, service provided out, money back through the door has been decreased, and the accuracy to which we are able to have them send the bills has increased significantly.
I think
That's
it's-
not to
that-
say
That's all
that-
my point, if you actually start breaking down the problem, sometimes you figure out you can solve some of it, maybe not all of it, which is fine. At least you identify, look, we understand we may not be able to take care of this in the current environment, but we can take care of that. And so you're not, instead of just, again, understanding if you can't touch the folks on Medicaid or Medicare, but hey, maybe we can actually have a plan where our goal is to get 20% more than we got last year, whatever it may be, which I think is a good idea.
And,
Yeah.
and one of the pieces that goes along with that is that the EMS staff is wholly invested in this. In the fact that we have seen them take the extra steps to assure that the accuracy is there and to close out their documentation in a timely fashion. And they understand that it's not just, well, we do the care and
Right.
something happens on the other end. They're wholly invested in that as well.
Is there a program, I know I asked you this question before, are there programs for our current insurance carrier for help with Narcan reimbursement? I know there's a lot of programs for free, I know you said we don't have an issue with supply, but at some point maybe we will. I mean, there's programs out there that we can take advantage of where your insurance companies are giving out free, free, I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong packages or, you know what I mean, dosages maybe is the right word, of Narcan. To help communities that are, kind of overrun with the opioid situation.
And we weren't able to take advantage of that. However, we were able to take advantage of the reimbursement.
Oh, great, okay.
And we do that on an it's done on a quarterly basis, and we do that automatically.
So just if you could maybe look for our current insurance carrier and just see if there's programs, because I know there are. I mean, I just saw a big donation from another one going to to another state, so it's out there, I'm just saying. Yep. Thank you. Councilman Bosco.
One more, I promise. That's it. I know back many years ago, we sat down and we were talking about, at one of the committee meetings, the helping the other towns, mutual aid. And Summers was a good one. They were calling us in, we'd stabilize the patient, and then they'd say, oh, take the patient and take the ride. And, are we still doing that, or are we taking them now?
It depends. As all things in medicine, it depends. I'm sorry, I'm stepping on your toes.
it's okay.
So we have a bundle billing agreement with them. And what that means is that they bill on our behalf for the advanced life support piece. The restriction to that is extensive, in that we're only allowed to do that for Medicare patients. State legislation is very clear that a patient cannot receive 2 ambulance bills. And essentially, getting a bill from Summers and then getting a bill from Enfield EMS would constitute.
But what I'm saying is we were, doing whatever, getting them ready, and then the Summers ambulance would just happen to show up just before you're ready to throw them in our ambulance.
Oh,
And, taking the patient.
yeah, that doesn't happen.
No.
It doesn't happen anymore. Same thing with East Windsor and everyone else. We go out there and
If
we
they,
have to do it.
if they want an ambulance, we're happy to go because we can fully bill and be very aggressive.
Yeah, and I just didn't wanna be driving home like we were back then. I mean, that was probably 7 years ago or something like that. More than that. Time goes by fast when you're having fun.
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Secretary Susan.
And I, like Joe, have one last question. When we took the tour of the prison, that certain sections of the prison are in Summers. And when Summers responds, they transport to Johnson, but that's not the affiliation that the prison has. Their affiliation is with Yukon Farmington. Do we have capacity that we could service the whole prison system and bring them to the affiliated medical center, which is Yukon Farmington?
So Summers will respond to their call. Sometimes they'll call us to assist them. But we wouldn't be able to just take over the prisons and go to Yukon. It has to be, it's called their PSA. So it's just like if, I don't know, if Summers wanted to handle all the responses to Lego, they wouldn't be able to because it's in our district. So we would not be able to do that. They
Okay,
do a lot of
not
times.
with a mutual agreement, because I would assume that if the state prison system transports to Yukon Farmington, that they would get a better billing rate and serviceability at that institute than they are getting at Johnson. So if they're, and I guess what I'm thinking is they're transporting to Johnson, and Johnson's then in turn transporting the patient to the Yukon Farmington. And it just seems that if we could do it in one step instead of two, that there might be some efficiencies there. And it's just something that kind of was interesting when we took the tour to find out that, you know, are these different affiliations. So it's just an idea, throwing it against the wall.
No, it's-
Something
it's
to
a-
stick, something to wall.
It's a good idea.
It's a
but-
good idea, and actually, I was approached by Summers a number of years ago, and they said, gee, we take all our prison calls. And I said, if I get half your PSA, primary service area. I can't do that. I said, but,
Okay, so that there
but-
have been negotiations is what I'm hearing.
but just FYI, as of July 1, the contract between the state corrections and Yukon
Yukon is ending.
is all done.
Okay, and so they'll affiliate with some other hospital or continue.
Or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure what will
I
happen. They
don't
might
know
be
what's gonna
moving some-
happen. I was just at a meeting when they said that the contract will be,
Because Yukon Farmington is a state-run hospital. I mean,
it makes sense. They have a special floor and
absolutely, but that doesn't mean anything. Thank you.
You said PSA was primary service area?
Yes.
Is that by town border or is that through some state statute?
it's.
Or both?
Yes.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes, thank you.
So is ours just Enfield or is it maybe some part of surrounding towns?
We're geopolitical boundaries of Enfield.
And in other towns, I'm assuming all of our surrounding towns have an ambulance service as well? Or does not they use a private, this AMR group?
Right.
Right, got it, okay. Thank you. Any other further questions? Thank you both, you did a great job. Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
Thank you.
always
Thank
good
you.
to see you.
Appreciate it.
When's the pancake breakfast?
You'll be advised. Counsel.
That's right. It's right on my way to work.
Good, thank you. You did a good job.
Did, good job.
Could have Joey pass you that.
I could have, but it's okay, I need to get up and walk around, blood flowing.
Chief Fox, please, and your team.
Thanks.
What page are we on, Brian, in the book that I write?
In the little one?
Yes, thank you, I'm sorry. I should have printed it, but 35, thank you, Lori. Lori's.
102.
Helping me out with that, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, with your permission, I'd like to pass
Sure.
out a sheet for the benefit of the council.
Sorry, what page is it in the name
It's 35 in the
Yeah.
summary
Good.
book.
How are you?
Mr. Mayor,
Sir, thank you.
thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to join you tonight. I am joined by Captain Golden immediately to my left, and I have asked Communications Supervisor Steve Hall and Officer Michael Krennewick to join me as well. Steve Hall, as you know, is responsible for the dispatch center, which has responsibility for not just the police department, but for fire and EMS as well. His budget, if you will, falls under mine to the extent that questions that you might have as to the dispatch center were going to come up on my watch. I thought it was worthwhile to have him join me. And Officer Krennewick fixes everything, takes care of everything within the police department, and to the extent that any questions that you might have might run on the technical side to some of the work that he does. He's been a godsend to me at the police department. I'm very appreciative for his services, and I wanted to make him available to you as well. Unless you would prefer a different format, I hit what I thought were my highlights.
Yep.
And I would run through those and then make myself available for any specific questions that you might have.
Sure. You have the floor, sir. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, I
Yep.
appreciate that. The proposed budget that you have before you addresses a number of items, and I suppose like every other town function, staffing and personal services occupy the bulk of my budget expense. In terms of staffing, pegging exactly the right number that the police department staffing is supposed to be at has been perhaps an elusive target and a moving target for me since my arrival. I have heard numbers that have ranged from 95 to 101 to perhaps a theoretical number of 103 at some point in the past. Understanding we were never going to be at that number, but that was a target number that allowed us to hit 101. As we sit here before you today, there are 90 sworn police officers within the Enfield Police Department. I have 5 vacancies, and those 5 would be filled to put me at 95 within the budget that is prepared before you. The 95 is, of course, obviously, less than the 101. I would also point out for you that I have any number of officers that, because they're in the drop program, give me a predictable, certain separation of service for those employees. Additionally, and I suppose this is true everywhere, but I think it's worth noting, I have a total of 8 employees that are out of service owing to FMLA, military leave, sick leave, or injury leave. So that's roughly 10% or so of my complement. And I suppose that's true across the board in every department, but that's a pretty sizable hit to take within the budget. The proposal that's before you, if it is approved, will allow me to reach my target staffing level of 95. My last observation on the budget is I know that there are some, and have been and will be, some much more big picture discussions of perhaps schedule modifications that might free up personnel within the Enfield Police Department. As you know, that's a mandatory subject of bargaining, and it will either need to be negotiated or awarded through arbitration. I have not lost sight of that, however, as an area of concern within the town council. Training is a second issue that I've identified for you. Training within the Enfield Police Department has been cut to only mandatory training in order to keep recertifications and any training that is totally free. And when I say totally free, that is no tuition cost, no travel overtime, and no backfill overtime cost. If I can squeeze someone into a training class within those parameters, they go. If I can't, and there's a cost associated with that training, then we've gut-wrenchingly had to say no in response to that. That's hard for us. We all want to have, we know you want to have, the best trained, most qualified individuals that we can, but we also recognize our fiscal responsibility back to this community. Department vehicles, no vehicles were purchased last year. You're certainly aware of that, more so than I am. A patrol vehicle within this community averages about 30,000 miles per year. They are typically hard miles as well. There are typically additional miles on that engine that aren't on the odometer. As in my previous employment, we can defer vehicle expenses. Please understand that at some point that does put one into what I refer to as the death spiral. If you don't replace an adequate number of vehicles per year, all of a sudden it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years out and everything is in horrific condition at that point. Detective Bureau. The Detective Bureau is down from 10 individuals to 8 individuals. The practical impact of that is twofold. The Detective Bureau does not take assignments for follow-up of any misdemeanor offenses. And that's just a line in the sand that had to be drawn in order to make appropriate use of those employees. I suppose as we sit here today, that's understandable. If you're the victim of a misdemeanor offense and you'd like to know what's being done beyond the patrol response and whatever expertise and time the patrol officer has, it's sometimes hard to hear that the detective division doesn't do follow-up on misdemeanor offenses. I would additionally point out with a drop from 10 to 12, I deplete those resources in the event of a large-scale event 20% sooner. And we look at this community and we say, well, how often does it happen? Maybe it doesn't happen all that often, but understand that just last month, without going into any inappropriate details, when we had the event at Woodgate, we had any number of detectives that were deployed to that. You're all aware of that incident. It is active, it is ongoing. And then later on that very next day, there was a sexual assault incident that came in. That took the remaining detectives I had that had rested, and that put them up to bat. There were no additional detectives at that point. The drop from 10 to 8 is notable in terms of staffing. Task force operations, we have no one assigned to any of the regional, state, or federal task forces. I believe quite enthusiastically that our involvement in the DEA task force, the FBI task force, the DEA task force, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I believe that we have a responsibility, to the extent that we can, to be inclusive and to join with our state and federal partners to take part in the greater good wherever it's possible. Understand that when we join those task forces, that has an impact on our staffing and on our budget. While I am very enthusiastic about the possibility in the future that we may receive an invitation to join the DEA task force, at this point, we have no one assigned to any task forces. That's a cost savings for the town. I would ever so delicately offer to you whether or not it might be the slightest, abrogation might be too strong a word, but the slightest abrogation of our responsibilities to law enforcement in a larger sense. Equipment and inventory. We've reduced our expenses for anything that is firearms, ammunition, crime scene processing, and office supplies to an absolute bare minimum. These are things like DNA swabs. These are things like fingerprint hinge lifts. These are things like fuming equipment, which our detective division uses. These are things like bags and evidence tape. These are things like targets and backers for those targets. Some of that simply has to be purchased, and we're purchasing just enough to get by with no backup, with no fluff, if you will. There's no storage room that's chock full of this stuff waiting for, 2 or 3 or 4 years out. We're buying simply what we need. Public engagements and special assignments, we have reduced those only to those offenses, only to those situations, situations that we can cover on straight time and with existing resources. We are trying to leverage wherever possible. Captain Golden has actually been instrumental in this. We are trying to leverage social media, our Facebook account, our Twitter presence, to try to engage in branding of the department. But our ability to send people out for a canine demonstration, our ability to send people out to speak at a school, our ability to go out for a crime prevention seminar, we're doing it on straight time or we're not doing it in an effort to save money. Crime scene van. The department's crime scene van is a 1985 crime scene van. It is 33 years old. It has technological issues. It has mechanical issues. It typically needs to be jumped when we're going to use it. And we're talking about some deterioration. We're talking about just some rot issues associated with a vehicle that's 33 years old. It is serviceable, but just barely. Speed enforcement equipment, we have deferred in the past radar and laser equipment that's in need of purchase, replacement. These were put off because of austerity measures. Speed enforcement, motor vehicle enforcement is a significant quality of life issue for our residents and for your constituents. It is perhaps not as apparent in the wintertime or early spring months, but when the warmer weather gets here and windows are open and cars are speeding and mufflers are loud, I expect to receive those calls from residents. And I expect those residents, if they're not happy with the robustness of our response, that they may then call you to ask why more isn't being done in any given area. We have equipment, it is aged, and the budget calls for the replacement of some of that equipment. Finally, I would offer to you, on a slightly positive note, and this vectors all the way back to the time of my initial hiring, that I am providing some of the legal update training within the Capital Region Research Program on town time, which is a savings within the police department training budget. I don't get any less work to do. The next day when I go in, I just have that much more still waiting at my desk, but that is realizing a savings for the town of conservatively several $1,000s per year, because that's some of the work that I do on the side. So those are the high points that I would identify for you in the big picture in terms of the budget. I and my team are certainly available and more than happy to address any specific issues, line items, or concerns that might present for you this evening.
Excuse me. Counselor No.
So first, thank you for the fiscal responsibility on this. It's very difficult when we get into times like this. The public safety is, treated like all departments. We're trying to get that funding stabilized. You're being so realistic with the 95 officers, so as long as I have been here and asked our former town manager for as long as he had been here, which is almost 20 years, never been up to full staff. So that's a realistic number I think you can hit, and I can appreciate you just having that number out there. It makes me feel good that you know you can make that target.
Thank you.
Because it's very difficult to make because of the 15-month training. DEA, I'm not gonna speak for everybody here, but the heads are gonna start nodding that this is something we need to work on. As a council, we've been pushing and waiting for this day, actually. It's a good thing.
Not a week goes by where I don't get, I would say, 2 to 3 calls. I got one today from a resident who wanted to know exactly how robust our response was, primarily to the opioid issue. And I would share with you with some pride that I think the team is doing very good work in regard to the social service piece, because that can be accomplished with existing resources. I also think that, I know that we are very proud of what I would refer to as some of the more one-off arrests that tend to occur now and again. And let me be clear, I am not intimating that we are going to arrest our way out of the opioid problem. It is merely one aspect of what it is we do. A more long-term, robust response, such as membership in the DEA task force, and as I believe we've spoken about offline, Lieutenant Pedamonte and I met with the regional supervisor for the DEA to stress our extraordinary interest in becoming involved in that working group. We will, when our time comes, we will do that because it is the right thing to do. I would also delicately offer to you that some of the asset forfeiture, which I know can be controversial unto itself, will serve to mitigate some of the expense associated with the loss of that officer to that task force.
And finally, the police profiles on Facebook. Don't know where that came from, but I saw it today.
It was great, yeah.
Awesome,
It's
awesome.
a team effort.
Thank you very much.
Like this
I
on
mean,
Facebook, please.
yes,
We have a
it's
campaign
anybody,
going on.
right, anybody out there, if you're not on Facebook, get on Facebook, just so you can meet our officers one by one, and it's a phenomenal idea.
Excellent,
Thank you.
yes, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Anyone else? Councilman Denny.
So your detectives aren't investigating the low-level crimes. And I'll bring up a point that I always thought about is, if you don't investigate or do anything about the low-level crimes, the so to speak broken window thing, then all it does is expand, because these people are getting away with a, not so much a misdemeanor, but something that say, oh, well, we'll slap them on their hands and then we'll move on. So to me, that's very important, because if you don't stop the speeders or the jaywalkers or the walking around with a bottle of booze in their pocket and so forth, and then it expands to something more. The other question I have is, if we have money for 5 more officers to bring you up to 5, what kind of a time span is that gonna take?
The answer to the first observation is a complete agreement with you. In an isolated misdemeanor case that was perhaps the aberration, certainly the captains, the lieutenants, the deputy chief, or I are well within our ability and authority to direct the detective division to do follow-up on a misdemeanor case. It is not as if they won't do it. It's not as if they can't do it. It's simply an allocation of resources on a day-to-day basis. And if and when that time comes, they'll be in fact directed to follow up on this one, because this one is worth it. But I certainly do appreciate the concern about the slippery slope. The misdemeanant today becomes the felon tomorrow. As to the second piece of your observation, we should count on roughly a 15-month window, a 15-month spin-up time, and that is allocating 6 months to the hiring process. In the state police world, it was 1 year for the hiring process. So if 6 months sounds like a long time, from my perspective, it's really, really quickly. That 6 months is everything from the written exam to the physical agility, to an oral interview panel, to an eventual chief's interview, to a polygraph, to a background, to a selection process. Then after the hiring process, we then have to send them off to the training academy for a 6-month period. If they're a comparative cert, if there's someone coming from another agency that's effectively a lateral, then we can cut that 6 months probably down to about 1 month, where they go through a lateral training program, if you will. The challenge in comparative certs is, while they're attractive, we have to make sure that we're hiring somebody who still has enthusiasm and who isn't leaving an organization for what we might call the wrong reasons. Thereafter, the FTO program is roughly 3 months. So if I add 6 months plus 6 months plus 3, it's 15 months before we get that body in a uniform ready for solo patrol. As a result, law enforcement is always in arrears in terms of hiring. I would offer to you, in better economic times, that I don't need to hire 5 people to replace my current 5 right now. I need to hire 5 right now to replace those 5, and 5 for the 5 that I know are going to leave in the coming year. I won't push my luck, I'm still the new guy.
So, I guess you answered my question, but, so, we're down 5, we're gonna, in July 1st, we're gonna give you enough money to hire 5, but in reality, by the time those people hit the streets, we're gonna be down 6 or 7 because of the drop plan and the people that are out. So we're always playing a catch-up program.
Yes, sir. The option, and again, this precedes me, I actually picked this up from a member of the council that offered that at one point a long time ago, there may have either been discussion, whether or not it was reduced to writing, I don't know, about a number of 103, because that's what would have put you somewhere closer to 101 as the target staffing level, knowing you were never going to and didn't want to get to 103, but 103 allowed you to achieve 101. 101 or 95 is a number that we're never going to get to, because the minute someone leaves, even if we have authorization to hire the next day, we've got that lag time, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just the nature of the system until that warm body is ready to go.
What's that? Councilman Fall.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
are we tending to maintain our staff, or are we losing officers to other police departments?
We lost 1 to the state police very recently. Other than that, we lost one to Newington a few years ago. That person has since returned. We lost one to the FBI.
Basically, we're doing a good job maintaining our staff. Well, that's a good. 'cause
That's an
it-
extremely good thing.
Yes,
I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to be very, very polite. What you don't want for your police department is you don't want to be AAA baseball for another organization. And unfortunately, there are instances, thankfully not in Enfield, where that is a little bit more the case. I do think that you have people who are here and they are working in what I affectionately call their forever job.
Councilman Falk.
So we lost one to the state police, but we gained one too.
It's sort of
trade? Is that
it's sort of an
considered trade?
in-house joke that it was the veteran slugger for the individual with a great deal of potential. I'd like to
Dave
think,
came in for Mario Rivera?
right? Yes, sir, that was the case.
Okay, my thought here, I was at a presentation where the chief from Manchester came in, talking about drugs. In fact, that they have some agreement or program with, I think it's St. Francis Hospital, where if somebody's picked up because of a drug issue, they're given an option, you can be arrested and thrown in jail, or you can go to treatment. And if you choose the treatment, they drive you over to the hospital, they stay with you until you're booked in there, and the hospital takes the patient away. Have we given any thought to a program similar to that? And if we did, is it gonna cost a lot of money for us?
It is not going to cost money. That's the second part. And the first part is, I think we're partway down that road right now. We are working with ETC and with social services along those very lines. If an individual presents at the police department and says, I want to turn in my narcotics, I want to turn in my drug paraphernalia, and I want help, that is something that I would really like to think, but I would guarantee in the future would be a person that receives help. If an individual, and the thought of this is just so extreme to me, I'd like to say it never would have happened, but never is a strong word. If a person voluntarily comes in and says, I want help, I cannot imagine a police officer anywhere that would say, turn around and put your hands behind your back. I also have been stressing, and like I said, we're pretty far down this road now, that if we go to an overdose situation, nothing good is going to come from us arresting that end user. So what we're doing is working with social services and with EMS right now to say, how can we either get that person to the emergency room, a discussion that you had with the previous panel, the previous group, or if they won't go voluntarily, how can we refer them to social services to get that care? Chief Montminy has formalized his program, perhaps a little bit. He's a little further down that road than we are in terms of giving it a formal title, but I do think that what you're describing is in place right now. The only piece that I blanched at somewhat that came up in some preliminary discussions was the prospect that if an individual offender offended in an instance where the victim, I'm not talking about simply a possession case, let's say it was a shoplifting offense, and the individual shoplifted from Target, and they were found to have narcotics in their possession, that if the offense they were arrested for was only a misdemeanor offense, and if they agreed to go seek treatment, we would not arrest them. That idea was advanced at one point, and I would respectfully offer to you that I don't think that's appropriate at our level. I don't think that it's within our province to be trading a non-prosecution in a case where there is a real victim for you won't receive any justice if this person agrees to go and get care. That might be a judicial decision, but I don't think in that instance, that's the only piece of what's been discussed thus far that I had to push back on a little. In summary, I am pleased to offer to you that we are going down the road that you're describing.
Yeah, I was thinking more about, you're out in Thompsonville and you have some issues and you come across somebody didn't steal anything, no shoplifting, but you caught him with all his paraphernalia or whatever. I'm thinking about that guy.
I would embrace the opportunity to bring that person for medical care.
And as it was told in this seminar, the person you were arresting or could arrest was given the option either be arrested or go for treatment. And that's the situation that I was thinking of. You threw out some others that
Yes.
are very good, alternatives. but that's the one I was thinking of.
You know, and this was, this brings, frankly, this brings me all the way back to my application process to this community months ago. Enforcement has to be a piece of what law enforcement does in regard to the narcotics issue, but please have a comfort level that your police department, your command staff, and I personally am very aware we're not going to arrest our way out of the opioid or any other narcotics problem. If we have the opportunity to get someone to services to address their addiction at a more holistic level, we're gonna grab that every single day.
Good,
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Councilman Arnott.
And that's one of the best parts of the DEA program too, is they've already implemented that 360 program that is that holistic program. So they're actually a great team to be teamed up with as we move through the do's and don'ts of our system. And again, we've been waiting a long time for this. So, and I know through, you know, everyone talking about it, discussing it, and social services and the Enfield Together Coalition, that we'll find a common ground with this.
The DEA task force is so attractive that frankly, that's why we're on the waiting list to get on board.
Yeah.
And I'm led to believe that we are, I'll be careful, I'm led to believe that we are
On the list?
close to the top of the list, but certainly that's for, it's not simply a matter of raising one's hand saying, may we come in. They have a staffing level that they're maxed at as well. And this was part of the discussion that we had with the DEA resident agent in charge for Connecticut.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Chief, when it comes to the DEA, and I apologize the way this sounds, but with the feds seeming to struggle so much with local jurisdictions of helping them, is there money available if we're willing to help them on certain situations, you mean we're trying to get in? Is there money there to, instead of us giving up a resource where the feds give us some money to help them with what seems to be a problem with local jurisdictions helping them?
The feds would, I'm sure upon request, come to town and, for all I know, may be in town, working, and this is the key, large-scale
Right.
narcotics issues.
Yeah.
They are not readily available for some of the lower-level offenses
Right,
that I'm
exact- yeah.
grateful that's primarily, that's the extent of what we have in town.
So,
But there is not, in short answer to your question, there is not some sort of block grant, if you will, that's available.
I guess that leads to the question of, so really, what is the issue, right? So what's the main issue when it comes to, whether it be in Thomasville or anywhere else? Is it the unfortunate person who's had opioids, go to heroin, or is it the drug dealers? I'm hearing different stories, that we have more of an issue with drug dealers, and maybe, not that we don't have issue with the folks who are using, that we have to, give Narcan to. So then the question is, what is it, what's the reality of it in town? And B, does the budget take care of that? What I mean by that is, we're gonna have folks walking in Townsville, or riding a bike, or having the dogs, or does this budget not cover it?
The budget would allow for the walking patrols in Thompsonville. That was actually one of the questions from a constituent
Right,
today.
I heard the same question.
Called, oh, very good.
And
The caller indicated they might be reaching out to you. Yes, it does allow for the walking patrols in
so
Thompsonville.
what about other parts of town?
The budget is, unless we take it out of the overtime money, the budget does
that-
not call for
Again,
that.
I have a beef with the overtime, and I said this last year. I'm sorry, the amount of money, and I know you mentioned negotiations, so I won't bring it up, but there's an idea where we do some different things with scheduling, where $600,000 can do a lot of good in this, when it comes to hiring a couple more police officers, whatever it may be, having more guys with dogs or on the bikes or whatever, where again, they're mobile and they're not just, I mean, I want the flexibility, for me, and that point for you folks, then instead of $600,000 in overtime. And again, I get the point about we're always kind of understaffed the way it works, but we have to figure out a way of somehow overcoming that a little
Sure.
bit. So,
When the
sorry,
state,
go ahead.
when
Yeah.
the state creates a training mandate,
Yeah.
which is often the case, or, and forgive me if this sounds personal, it isn't meant that way, when prior town councils agree to a contract that allows a certain amount of time off,
Right,
the employees they're not necessarily limited to taking that time off only when staffing will absorb it. So if we drop below minimum, day shift, evening shift, midnight shift. If we drop below minimum, the overtime is called out to replace that individual. So if there's a sick day or a vacation day or a mandatory training day, and we drop below that minimum threshold, overtime is
Understand,
called out.
yeah, I know.
A late arrest, and we try whenever possible to have the incoming shift process, say it's a drunk driver or a domestic violence dispute, a bias crime, whatever it might be that occurs at 11 PM. We're trying to have the tail end of the evening shift process it, or the first part of the midnight shift process it, but there certainly is a loss of continuity if you're processing your drunk driver and you're midway through the blood alcohol content testing process, and someone's gonna come in and take over that for you. So that's part of it, and then the backfill is part of it, and then the call-outs are part of it too. If a dog has to get called in after hours, if the detective division gets called in after hours, if the CREST team is activated, that's the regional SWAT team. If Metro Traffic Services is activated, Metro Traffic Services might be going to Suffield for a fatal motor vehicle accident, but understand that next week, the tactical team, which has got people from all over, are coming to Enfield, for an instance. That's regionalization within some of those specialized functions. That's what all that overtime is going toward.
So what's the majority overtime going to? Is it more of, again, for folks, for backfill, is it actually legitimate investigations where someone needs, that's what I wanna understand, cause I don't think I understand it.
I would have to say it's backfill, but that is because when we backfill, we're backfilling for 8 hours at a time.
Right.
If it's a late, to use my example from a moment ago, if it's a late drunk driving arrest, that might only be 90 minutes of time. So the frequency versus the hours, the bulk of it is gotta be going for backfill.
So I just think we need to manage that as a budget and then within our negotiations, because we gotta, I'm sorry, we gotta get more for our money here.
I can assure you that from an operational point of view, it's managed quite judiciously in terms of allocated leave time within contractual mandates. We, just as we did in state service, we sort of live now with what
So if
previous
we're-
generations have agreed to.
If we got a different kind of shift, which is some of the things we've talked about, different shift, methodology, for lack of a better word. Would that allow us through that, be able to put some walking or some guys on a bike in Skidco, in Green Manor, and some other sections of town? Not, of course, we need them in Thompsonville, but we also need them in other sections of town as well. So I guess that's my question to you. Does that give us, again, the flexibility where we're not just simply, again, doing it in one section of town, because we have issues in other sections of towns as well? And so I guess that's what I'm asking, the other question.
I suppose the answer from an Excel spreadsheet point of view is yes, it
Right.
would. And I certainly don't wanna go into areas that are not appropriate for this
No,
forum.
Fair point, yep.
But
I don't wanna put you on the
obviously,
spot.
there's either the negotiation route
Right,
or the arbitration route
Right.
before the community can get to that sort of a schedule. And there are, some folks that feel strongly, at least in terms of the temperature that I've taken in the last 5 weeks or so.
fair. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
And my goal is merely to provide you with the most candid response that I can.
No, and again, you're being honest, I appreciate the response.
Thank you, sir.
Councilman Deddy.
I guess my other question is about training. It says mandatory training and mandatory training only. Does that mean, well, I guess I'll let you elaborate. Does that mean we're not doing active shooter training? Or does that mean, I don't know.
The post council, the regulatory police academy body, mandates 65 hours, 60 hours every 3 years. And that is accomplished through a 40-hour program, 8:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, that everyone cycles through once every 3 years, plus the supplemental training that they receive, for example, in firearms or EMS care. So that's how we get to that 60 or 65 hours every 3 years. That's what I would consider the mandatory. We can certainly also send people for, as I've alluded to in here, or as I've stated in here, we can send people to supplemental training if it's not going to have a cost.
Okay.
We have, as an agency, prior to my arrival, done that active shooter training for the entire department. There's going to be a cost for that if that takes place, because that's not covered in that 40 hours. To the extent we can bring active shooter training to off shifts, well, it's gonna save us some, but now you're gonna pay for the trainers off shifts, and you're gonna be taking people that are working on the evening shift or the midnight shift, and you're gonna be using them, so you've gotta keep an eye on your staffing levels at those times as well. It's a bit of a balancing act.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir?
Councilman Falk.
I attend a lot of CROG meetings, and there's an underlying theme at CROG, and that's called regionalization. And one of the things they talked about regionalizing was dispatch. Wasn't even mentioned it, but you just threw it out, it stirred that thought process. And I don't know if you had given that any thought, whether there's been a discussion about this, either internally or externally. You've only been here a short while, so maybe not. But it's something out there being discussed and could potentially, down the road, be a reality. I think if you centralize, you don't need as many people. That's why you would do it in the first place. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you would enjoy an economy of scale, certainly to the extent that we regionalize anything. It is a contentious issue, and the question is, who are the employees going to work for? Where are they going to be housed? What facility is going to be big enough to accommodate a regional dispatch center? There are issues of subject matter expertise for individuals that might know this community, that might not know a neighboring community to the same degree. The analogy may not hold completely, but you may remember back about 5 or 6 years ago, I certainly remember it very well, where the state police endeavored to regionalize our dispatch centers, and it was not well received, and it eventually was returned to what it is now, which was the previous status quo. I would make the communications center supervisor available to either comment on that now or in the future, if that's something you'd like to discuss in any further depth.
No, we don't need to get into it tonight. I just threw it out merely as food for thought. Pros and cons, because it'll probably come up again.
Sure. The answer has to be twofold. The answer has to be that regionalization, wherever it's feasible, is a discussion that we want to have. But sometimes the devil is in the details, as they say.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilor No.
I don't think I might have
Oh, you
just
didn't?
gestured by some.
Sorry.
I'm good though, thank you.
So Chief, I have one last question.
Yes, sir.
So I know so for the individual that called us about Thompsonville, will we have, you don't have to tell me your game plan, but at some point you're gonna report that says we did X, Y, Z, just to see, again, some of the things that are happening, what the results may or may not be, even if they're not, hey, we arrested 500 people. My sense is I need more of that, right? I need to understand what we're doing and what some of those results are.
Sure.
And so I don't know if we can get a quarterly report as a request through you to again, if we're doing some of these things, I understand you're not gonna tell us your game plan because you don't want, because you need to keep it, under wraps, but hey, look, we have a special program and here's what some of those results would be. It'd be great, we get the PAR every meeting, but it'd be great if we can get a quarterly update on actually some results that some of the initiatives you folks may be working on. So again, when we get the calls that there's drug dealers in every corner in Thompsonville, I need some reality of that
Yeah.
situation.
So I can provide you with anything you want, obviously.
Right.
The level of directed narcotics enforcement within the town is not as vibrant as I would like it to be. In order to have a narcotics working group, this is not one officer at a time.
Right.
This is probably 3 to 4. And we could probably spend more time than you want to having this discussion as a standalone subject area. 3 to 4 officers to do narcotics enforcement. We're talking about undercovers, contact officers, cover officer, evidence officer. And yeah, we can take them occasionally out of the detective bureau, but if we take them out of there in order to assist with a narcotics investigation, then they're not doing some of the felony offenses, never mind the misdemeanor offenses.
Right.
I would love to be able to dedicate 3 or 4 officers solely to narcotics enforcement. I don't know that the budget provides for that right now. The DEA task force is an option. We've kind of talked that one through already. The regional task force, I reached out to those communities specifically and got the chiefs that we were partnered with before. For a multitude of reasons, they are not interested in repartnering within that function. That's really about all that's available to us.
Okay. I mean, but if, just some updates on some of the things that you've, and then the other thing just to consider, and I know this has been brought up a little bit, any idea of if there's possibility of having an officer at the top of Enfield High twice a day? Instead of, you know, as an option, not purchasing a light there, or until we purchase a light.
I know that was a discussion in your world.
Yeah.
In all candor, I have not received any direction
Okay.
in this regard just yet. But whatever the council through the manager, to me, decides, I certainly will make happen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Crisati.
I want to thank you for your very, very thorough in terms of your high points on the proposed budget.
Thank you, sir.
I like the idea of your training, everything is on straight time. I think that's very effective. In terms of the vehicles, hard 30,000 miles, is there a plan in place that X amount of cars are gonna be replaced every 2 years, every year, every 3 years, every 5 years? Do you have a vision for that, like right now within this budget? For replacing vehicles?
Brian can talk to that.
Brian's got that.
So, to that question, Counselor, there is a vehicle equipment replacement plan that was put together by Jonathan and his team a few years back. We did budget to begin a scheduled replacement process of those vehicles and several others in the fleet within last year's budget. Unfortunately, because of cost constraints, we weren't able to do that. But in this year's budget, again, we have set up that pattern to have his vehicles, and again, vehicles throughout the fleet, swapped out in scheduled timed groups so that we can consistently have operational vehicles and equipment. This year, I believe it's 11 in the plan, so it's just over $500,000. It's almost 600,000.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Unless you have anything final you'd like to say? No?
We appreciate the support the community shows for the police department, and we'll continue to work hard to earn and retain that trust.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Jonathan's travel light. You shot.
You just had Mike carry everything for him.
We got extra chairs. That was impressive.
And you know, it's hard to keep.
Geez, John, I hope they're getting as big as yours.
It's the Seinfeld episode. Is there a tape recorder in there?
Did you empty your desk out?
Jonathan was a Boy Scout.
Oh.
That's the mobile desk.
What page does it look, Brian?
On the short side, 43.
You got home?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Softball practice. Took my budget book out, right on my counter. That's where I left it.
Suzanne. That's not really part of what we're talking about, but I'll just give you a copy. And then there's, if you can, these can go around the table.
I like the old ones, they got character. Thank you, sir. All right, you all set, sir? All right, we're gonna turn the floor over to Jonathan and his entire team. Go ahead, sir. Floor is yours.
Okay. Here. It's gonna be a long walk up. And come back behind me, thanks. Good evening, I'm Jonathan Bilmus, the Director of Public Works. And with me I have my management team, and we're just gonna take one moment and introduce each of them, and they can raise their hands as the evening goes on, depending on what your questions are. One or all of them may be called up to the table to help answer things. So Greg Gabinell is the Deputy Director of Public Works. Mike Slazik is the Assistant Director and the Business Manager. Mark Garr is the Facilities Manager over Custodial and Buildings and Grounds. Danny Edwards, Assistant Director over Refuse and Resource Materials and Highway. Rick Davenport is a Fleet Manager. Kevin Schlatt, Water Pollution Control Superintendent, and Donald Nunes, who's trying to hide in the corner, is Roads Engineer. So we've passed out the list, and also the org chart, just page one, it just stops at the crew leader level. There's a whole other page with the rest of the staffing, but this is the top part of the organizational chart. So I know we don't have a formal PowerPoint, but I think it's appropriate to just give a little overview first, and I want to thank you all for your support this year and prior years. Our resources are stretched, but we're not going to belabor that point. It was a great weekend for Public Works. We had over 300 people coming to Moody Road with paper shredding and oil and batteries. We had hundreds of people at the transfer station on a typical Saturday. We had thousands of people at the Little League opening day, the soccer opening day, the Earth Day, all that, of course. We had to prepare fields. The weather hasn't been cooperative, and it was done in a great job. Every week, of course, we make 14,000 stops in town picking up refuse. We make 7,000 stops in town picking up your recycling. We make thousands of stops in town every Friday picking up yard waste right now. So again, this weekend was kind of a highlight. I thought Public Works did very well, and many people in town participated in those activities. And then, as I said, every week people are meeting and greeting Public Works one way or the other. Just as introduction of two more things before we get into some specifics. So I want to hand out an overview of the Public Works budget today, what's in the book, and just talk about it for 1 minute. I'll wait till it makes its way around because I want to refer to a couple of the numbers on the spreadsheet. If you can give me the extras, that would be great, because I need to pass them back. Town clerk. So this is a summary that we do, that you don't see or have, and it basically looks at the next year's budget and division by division, the changes, and we're overall 1% over last year, or the current year's originally adopted budget. But that includes, you'll see we made two adjustments here, two things that are somewhat unusual that are in our budget that we can talk about as you like. One was buildings, in the buildings and grounds budget. There's $140,000 for JFK items. One is a boiler rental, and the other is quarterly PCB testing. And the other thing that the town manager did this year is he moved capital funds to the administration division to the tune of $225,000. So if we take and make an adjustment for those things, the total DPW budget year over year, in terms of things we can control, is actually down 1.1%. So again, as you've heard others, you know, we are very serious about looking at our expenses and controlling our costs. So that's, I also want to point out before we leave this, if you see that the total DPW budget is 17 million here, and of course, water pollution control falls under DPW. If we add that in, we're somewhere around $21, $22 million of operating expenses. And I didn't bring the schedule with you, but on top of that, we're about $30 million of capital expenditures next year. So you take our operating budget, which is all I'm talking about right now, 20-some million, add the capital of 30 million, we're over $50 million going through Public Works next year, which is $1 million a week. So that's a big operation, the biggest on the town side by far, and there's a lot to it. So I'm sure you know. One more handout before we get into some specifics. Again, background information. Let me grab one from the clerk.
No, because then I would have asked for it when you printed anyway.
We can pass these. So just a couple, again, summary slides. On the lower left-hand side is our DPW employee count, color-coded by division, the largest numbers in custodial. On the lower right is the operating budget percent by division. And on the top is our overtime department-wide. And then each little piece of the column is a different division. And so there's a slight increase this year. We don't have this year, for next year, I'm sorry. We don't have this year's actual in, but over the last 5 or 6 years, there's only been 1 year where we haven't gone over our overtime. So again, we continue to under budget the overtime. We're trying to be as accurate as possible. A lot of that depends, of course, on weather and other factors, but as the number is not overly generous.
Excuse me, the blues are kind of fading into each other, so the water pollution control.
The larger light blue would be highway, and the smaller blue would be RRM.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we've done that. Last handout, which is basically gonna be the specific items that we're gonna go over here for the division before we open it up to Q&A. And if you wanna stop as we're going through these, you let me know. So my understanding is you have your budget books, and these are sequenced in the order of your pages in your budget book, so that's why administration's first and so on. So I'll introduce these, if you will, and then we can either come back to any division you want or however you want to do it. There's plenty of room here to write your questions as I'm talking, so. First thing is the administration. The major change, as I said, or really the only significant change, was moving funds from capital to operating in the other professional services account. On buildings and grounds, the first two I called out already. There's a rental boiler at JFK continues. We rented a boiler this year. We had to extend the rental because it's been cold. We've budgeted $40,000 for renting a second boiler at JFK next year. That we're planning to go out to bid on, but that is our budget estimate. The next item, quarterly PCB testing at JFK will continue, $100,000 a year. Natural gas and electricity, and on this one more handout for you, because it's fairly complicated. And there's been a lot of questions about this. I'll do my best on this one, but I'm sure I'll need some help. Thank you. So there are 3 columns here, and let me just explain. Overall, as you can see, our utility costs are going down. From 2014 to 2015, they were hitting $3 million. Next year's budget, all in, is about a little over $2 million. So that's a very positive trend. I mean, that's obviously, part of that is weather-related, and we can't take credit for that, but also energy prices have come down and stabilized. Then another good part of it is the Honeywell Energy Performance Contract referendum that the citizens passed, that we're budgeting next year a full year of savings, and Greg and others can talk about that in more detail. So just looking from last year to next year on the natural gas, that's a real budget decrease. The electric number is odd. The one in the middle, the column second to the right, there's a gray number, and we highlighted that because that's this year's electricity budget. But as you recall, last year, when we were sitting here at the budget time, we knew that the Honeywell project was going to be implemented during this year, but no one was ready at that time to account for the savings in any particular fund or area. In other words, people weren't prepared to say this much in gas, this much in electricity, this much in street lights, this or that. There was a projected savings. And we also didn't know exactly when all those installations would be done. So the town, and again, I might defer to the finance director here, said we will book all the savings, $400,000 of savings in this one account, just to make it easy. And then at the end of the year, if we need to move money around, we will do that. So that's why between the 2017 actual and the 2018, that's almost a $400,000 decrease, because all the Honeywell savings were taken in that one account. So for the next year, if you look at the next year's budget, $1.3 million of electricity, that's an accurate number based on everything we know right now. And you say, why is it going up? Electricity's not really going up. It's just that all the savings accrued to that one account. They weren't real. They were projected, and so this is a real number. So it looks like electricity is increasing. But again, if you look at the total town budget, and that's why we put this column chart together, it's decreasing. The total energy budget is decreasing. That's what we're trying to show here. And the last piece is where the streetlight savings come in. That's what's in gold colors. We're showing you there's a decrease there too. So it's a big picture look at the energy. So that's kind of a long explanation. I hope the chart helps. So back to the sheet. Again, we can dig into any of these as when we get to it. The next item was something that you all asked questions about during the austerity. It's not a big number. Just pointing out again that we've cut our temporary and seasonal help budget in buildings and grounds. That was done as part of the austerity measure. And so unless there's additional funds brought in, we will not be hiring seasonal help this summer, which is a departure from previous years. So this money would allow us to hire the following summer. Just through, that's what's in there. Moving on to custodial. Actually, I will not hand this out at this time, but there's a part-time and overtime accounts are basically status quo. We have a management study that's started. It's about halfway through, and we're waiting for recommendations from the consulting firm about how best to manage our part-time and full-time custodial staff to hit the sweet spots. So for the time being, we have budgeted basically stable numbers there. So that's why there's no change. But it is a big issue and something that we definitely want to look at.
Why is it an issue?
It's an issue because of the time and effort that it takes to hire part-timers, and the question about whether we are hiring the right number of part-timers and what exactly they should be doing to help reduce the overtime. Because the total chart shows that we haven't reduced our total costs, we've shifted costs. And that may be, and I can hand this out if you like, and that may be good, but we're convinced that we needed someone else to look at it and help us decide how to manage our resources. They may at the end say, you're doing what you can. This is, you know, the cost would even be higher if you weren't doing what you're doing. But we feel we need an outside look at it, and that's what's happening. Just the concern is, as the town implemented this whole custodial part-time effort in 2012 to cut on overtime. The idea was you'd hire part-timers and overtime would come down, but what we're showing is the total costs have been the same. So we're questioning the resources and the management and whether we're doing the right job. We're trying to.
Good for you.
Wasn't that a council initiative for a long time, and we never funded it? And then finally, I think last year, we finally funded the study. We've been trying to chase these numbers for quite a few councils.
There's always an overhead with part-time as well as with full-time, and
You know, I appreciate the fact that you're looking to audit yourself, to actually come up with data, to actually explain the situation, which is great to hear. Instead of, again, we'll get into it, I'm not a big fan of all the overtime we have in our budget, but at least I give you the credit to actually trying to base it on data and what's actually happening, which is great to see. I mean, so we can actually have that discussion. And maybe you're right, maybe there's something else we didn't think about.
So there's no big change there. In the highway, we didn't call anything out, only to point out that the entire highway budget went down. And the fleet services budget has a minuscule increase, so there's really not a lot we wanted to bring up at this point with that. On refuse and resource management, there's a couple new things, and I will hand this out. The budget assumes that we're gonna stop collecting from these 156 accounts. That's where the $19,000 savings is coming. these are all what would be called commercial accounts in lingo and legal language that the town has been collecting since I don't know when. So anyway, as part of our recent contract negotiations, we produced and came up with this list, and it's very unusual, to say the least, for a municipal entity to be cherry picking which businesses they're picking up from, because if you're picking up from one, why aren't you picking up from all of them? And so the town manager asked us to, come up with this list and an estimate of how much we would save if we stopped picking up from these locations that you have before you.
So this isn't the whole town?
This is the whole town. These
The
are,
few that we are collecting, but it's not all the businesses.
no, we're not supposed to collect from businesses as far as I know, but we have been.
So if we, so as part of the, I mean, would we do it for a additional charge? No.
We would, it would be, it's very, I'll say it again, it's very unusual for a
No,
town
yeah.
to pick and choose which businesses. If you can, there are ways to pick up from the entire commercial accounts in Enfield. There's franchising and there's other things, which I don't think we're recommending you do, I don't think you wanna get into. There's a whole private sector out there that manages commercial and industrial waste and recycling pickups, and somehow we've dipped our toe in and picked 156 winners.
I can answer that.
So why is
I
EMS,
can answer that.
why is EMS on here? Any particular reason why we have EMS? That's the only one I
On the
would,
second page,
I would
on
have a-
top, it says Enfield EMS.
as quickly as I can go through this in the eye, that would just be costing us more money anyway, but.
Yeah,
Just
and there,
saying.
and there was a recommendation not to continue to pick up the food pantries. So
Yeah.
maybe there's 158 and maybe it's 154.
So
You
it's
know.
yeah,
This is on Elm Street. Where's that? 94.
yeah, that's, I just saw EMS on it, unless it's another EMS,
Yeah,
you know, the
where's-
way they are.
I
with-
know.
Could be, it could be, maybe it's something else. Enfield Motorsports, I don't know.
Oh, it could be.
Police station?
This list right here, what happened just before I got on the council, when they did that, they took all businesses that were already getting their trash picked up when they redid everything, and grandfathered all them people, so they could get their trash collected. So technically, I could have had my trash collected, but it was easier for me to have a dumpster, and I got a dumpster, but these were all supposed to be companies that were in business before we started picking, when we were picking up trash from everybody, because we used to pick trash up for the whole town, businesses and all. Then it went to, we were just picking up residential and the businesses that were already here. And as I'm looking down here, there's some newer businesses that should have never been there.
Yep.
Because once that business ceased, your grandfather goes with it. So, the reason why you're seeing them is here is these people were all grandfathered when we went to, picking up trash a different way. Now, I'm not 100% against getting rid of it, but, again, you and some of this information is just totally inaccurate. Hair Studio on Simon Road, that goes in my dumpster. You don't collect trash from them. So, you have these lists of people, and some of them, you're not even collecting trash. It's showing here that you're collecting their trash, but you're not collecting their trash. So, but that's the reason why, and some of these places that are new, Mark's Restaurant, a lot of the ones here that I see that are relatively new, we should not have been picking theirs up. So it goes from a certain time, and that's why we were getting them. The next problem I do see though on a lot of these things, you start not picking trash up on this place, like Mark's Restaurant. Where's he gonna put his trash? Where's he gonna put his dumpster? I don't know if we're gonna be able to get, Summer Sanitation or one of them other companies that go out there to pick up one garbage can from some of these people down in Thompsonville. There is gonna be no room for dumpsters, never mind if I decide that I'm gonna put a dumpster in my yard because the town's no longer picking up trash. You're gonna have 158 people are gonna be against our zoning regulations. Because you need a zoning permit to put a dumpster. So, I applaud your thinking, but I think we need to figure out another way of doing this, and it just may be that we just don't take businesses for free and we charge. Or we still have to take care of the ones that were grandfathered, and everyone else has gotta find their way of doing it, cause it's the only fair thing when we change something. We shouldn't be going back after them, and that went down to the point when we were taking leaves, and last year you wanted to charge for leaves at the dump. And we stopped that because we were getting leaves picked up. You know, we were giving a service to people on getting their leaves, and now you take it away, you can't really charge them. And, so, I don't know how we're gonna come up with this, but there's a lot of people on this list that should not be grandfathered. And,
Well, again, in the absence of any type of written policy or procedure, staff
no, I
was
understand.
picking up a location
Yeah.
and continued to
This is
pick
the
it up.
problem
whether-
when we have too many new people don't remember what happened and why we got somewhere. But that is the reason why we're picking up some businesses and not others. But when a business ceased, they were supposed to pick up their own trash.
Well, I'm just telling you, that's in the budget, that's
Right.
something that the manager
I'm just-
proposed, and how you
What I'm
deal with
thinking
it's
is
up to
another
you.
way, you know, how are we gonna do this? Because again, we can't, some of these businesses, we can't tell people they gotta put dumpsters, cause there's just not gonna be any room for dumpsters.
No,
I-
sounds like-
So I think in the general sense that that's not the only option available from private haulers is to have dumpsters.
Well, yeah, but did we check on, see if they will pick up single cans?
But so, what I would say is that wasn't our responsibility, nor is that the charge. The charge was to present to you a budget that was as cost-effective and efficient as possible.
And I applaud you for doing that, you
And
know,
so-
you're thinking. So I'm not picking on you, I'm
Just
just,
today, Joe, just
Right.
I'm
thinking
just
today.
thinking another way, cause we can't put these people in a box if they can't get their trash picked up.
Public Works Subcommittee.
Yeah, well,
Sounds like a job for you
Right, and it
guys.
should've came to us.
Right,
Okay,
right,
so,
exactly.
Every committee, I'm like-
So, but Joey, to your point, it's not written down, so we didn't,
Right.
it wasn't available
No,
for us to find it, so.
I'm not chastising, I'm actually applauding you for
Right.
doing this. It's just that now that you brought it up, we have to figure out a way of solving this so it'll work fair for everybody.
So, and we're more than happy to look at whatever direction you might give us, and if this is something that you want to amend in some way during the deliberation portion, and you wanna reduce it from 20,000 to 10,000, and, we can, meet under subcommittee and figure out how
Right.
this is gonna, that's fine.
Yeah,
We're
it has
just-
to be refined, that's all.
Right.
The concept, I think, right, we're saying the concept
Right,
is
I
good.
I
Right,
appreciate
right,
what
right.
you did, it's
Yeah.
just that we
I get
have to figure out that first off, can these people get a private contractor to come with a tipper barrel to take their trash? Because if they don't, I mean, what do we do? And a lot of them, it's not gonna be an issue, they can put a dumpster in their yard and they're all set and someone will pick it up, but, and then the next thing was just to let you know why we got here.
What's the savings in this?
$19,000.
Total.
estimated,
Some of these
yeah.
don't exist.
This is
so-
total
Yeah,
for all of these?
yeah,
Is that the savings for the tonnage?
that's the savings for the tonnage.
Not the actual labor of going and picking it up.
Yeah, we didn't parse it down to that level because we were driving down the street and, the cost per stop. It's, you're getting into a level of detail, as you can see, we're not even sure we're gonna go
Yeah.
this way, so.
So how did you come up with the tonnage? Some of these generate a lot, some
We
don't.
used an average, a factor, a commercial factor, and you know, we know our averages on a typical stop across the town, and we multiply it a little bit by the commercial. We can give you the calculation. It's written down, it's not,
It's about $11 a month for, if you divide it by equally between each business, 19K savings, right?
I
Roughly.
didn't do that way. I mean, I
Just
just
saying.
get gross number. Again, we didn't parse it down
Right.
much more. We're
This is
just
a good
trying to
idea, yeah,
Press
but-
the concept out here. I mean, you're asking us
Right.
to look at different ways of
No,
doing
this
business.
is
and
a great, I don't know why we
this
don't
and
try to
that.
charge if some of these folks
Most of
can't.
these are not, and most of these are not dumpsters, these are,
They all gotta be tipper
They're,
barrels.
they're tipper
Tipper
barrels,
barrels,
they're
correct?
tipper barrels.
they're all
I
tipper
believe
barrels.
so. Do you know?
Yes.
They're all tipper barrels?
And if they
Maybe
want-
maybe the thing is we charge these people,
We
the
should be,
businesses, a fee.
we should be.
Right, you know, but we just can't stop picking them up, that's where I'm getting.
Yeah, like the Love and Hope there, the church, there's no room there.
Right,
Well, again, they have room now for a tipper barrel.
Right.
And we're picking it up.
Yes, I agree.
So you're
Yep.
basically
right, a
saying
tipper barrel.
Right.
a private company
Right.
could also give them a tipper barrel and pick it up. It's not rocket science, it's a matter of who's paying and why.
Deputy Mayor Susan.
That's the
Yeah,
issue. It's
agreed.
not the physical inability to pick it up, because we are picking it up, and a private company can pick it up
Well, it's
too.
the cost effectiveness to the
It's
customer.
whatever, that's what I'm saying, it's
you
not
can
that they
find someone
can
to
or
do it.
can't be picked up, it's the other policy and other
Not
issues.
even if it's, it's all
Deputy Mayor
of us, no.
Susan.
Yes?
Okay, so.
So
yeah,
wait.
Bring up a
Oh, I'm
point.
sorry,
They-
go ahead.
They don't have a, you know, the tipper barrel's gotta fit, but I have a resident that has a pet peeve of people leaving their tipper barrels on the sidewalk, 24/7. What, do we take care of, you know, ticketing these people, or is that an issue with the police department?
We have proposed a total rewrite of the town's solid waste ordinance that would clarify when people can put them out, when they need to bring them back, and it has a whole new fine system in there, and that is being reviewed by the town attorney.
Headed to
And that would,
Thank
that
you.
would have to go to
Headed to
DPW.
DPW subcommittee.
Oh, wonderful. But, you know, it is something, and it is annoying, you know, when people leave their barrels out forever. So,
I'd say let's move on, because you may have questions about other items, but the next item, I'm gonna turn it over to the manager and the finance director. There's an increase proposed in the bulky waste pickup fee, which actually doesn't show up in our budget. And as Councilman Bosco said, last year, we proposed, DPW proposed changes in a number of different fees, including the bulky waste pickup fee. And I guess this year, the manager and finance director put in increased revenues from the bulky waste pickup, so I don't know if they wanna talk to that.
You don't wanna own that one? No, I'm teasing. So last year we did an analysis, again, attempting to try and understand, where some of our service costs were, with respect to, not just lumping everything together under, the taxes. So at that time, there was, an analysis that came out of RR&M, that the average, price per bulk waste pickup was actually about $170. We were charging $100 per pickup. Additionally, there was identified approximately $30,000, we'll call it an unscheduled bulk, that the town was effectively being forced to pick up largely out of Thompsonville, where folks were just throwing waste out from their rental units. And it wasn't only occurring in Thompsonville, but it was largely occurring in Thompsonville, and it created problems because all of that material was largely put on the sidewalk. So the town was effectively forced to pick this material up, and we're unable, based on the way that the current legislation is written, we're unable to recoup any of our costs from having to pick this bulk waste up. So there is a provision down in the town attorney's office which amends, I believe it is chapter 74 of the code, that more empowers the town to be able to pick that up and directly seek reimbursement from the adjoining property owner, much like we would do with sidewalks. So there's some additional money in there. So the net effect, we currently estimate to be right around 30,000 additional dollars, 15 down, and $15,000 down as far as the unrecovered expense on those bulk waste pickup, and then the balance of that would come from the additional upcharge for the bulk waste pickup being closer to our actual cost of about $170,000.
So that's in the budget. If it's okay, I'll move on, because I know you still want to talk about the capital budget tonight. So water pollution control has a number of things here to mention. First is the overtime budget, and water pollution control has been increased, and Kevin can come up and explain that. He has some backup on that. There's a disposal services account that had 0 last year, and this year it has $24,000, and that's just an account that we funded for transparency. We moved 3 things into that account that were basically buried in another fund. So it allows us to track those costs easier, and then the next fund shows where they were. There's a plus 24 and a minus 24, so basically move 24,000 from here to there, again, for purposes of transparency and tracking. And on the operating budget for water pollution control, I know some of you want a little more explanation about the 2 additional employees, and we do have some backup on that, but let me just summarize that this started with an industry management study in 2015 that looked at the plant and determined that, in fact, they needed more than 2 extra people. They actually needed 4. So that was already several years ago. In addition to that, Kevin has recently done a comparison between Enfield and 5 other neighboring water pollution control facilities, and we can hand that out. And he can talk about some of the interesting things there, one of which is that in Enfield, we do not have a separate lab person. There's another person who's doing the lab work and so on, and among other things that's on this sheet. The third factor in terms of increasing staffing is what's called CMOM, and we have a little handout about what does that mean and why is that increasing staffing, and we called out 4 different bullets as to what's happening here, and I'll hand this out, but this is a regulatory program. The DEP is implementing, requiring water pollution control agencies to take care of the collection systems. Now, there's not just the plants, you have to do things to manage your collection systems. Again, we have 4 examples there. So we have an industry study that says there's not enough people. We have comparisons with other facilities nearby that show we're understaffed. We have a new regulatory requirements that we're not doing and we can't do unless we do some staff or hire consultants. And the 4th thing is, as you all know, there's hopefully going to be a brand-new facility down there on Parsons Road in the next couple years. And this goes along with all the other public works projects that we've been doing, that when we build new assets, and when the citizens vote for new assets and referendums, whether it's the high school or the roads or the Honeywell project, which we talked about the savings, but to keep those savings, you have new computer building management systems, you have new air filters, new boilers, things need maintenance, trucks and vehicles. When you buy those, they need maintenance, and the water pollution control facility, we're gonna spend, we in the state, almost $30 million. We need to maintain it. Otherwise, you've made an investment in the capital, it needs maintenance. So all those factors are why, we've proposed these 2 additional staffing people. So
Excuse me, does that fall under the WPC and the fee structure for user fee?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it
So it's not
does.
part of the general fund budget?
No.
It's part of
No.
WPC?
It's part of water pollution control budget.
Okay.
Which falls under public works, but it's not a hit on the general fund, it's based on the sewer fund, but we're talking here tonight about expenses.
Counselor knows.
Just wanna make it clear.
So,
So this is something that gives me heartburn tremendously, because we sat in on a subcommittee, a facility subcommittee, for the Water Pollution Control Authority, and we set the budget, and we set the new fee rates under not any idea that there was an increase in the budget. So, but it's in there. But the actual numbers that were given to us from the engineers and staff was based on this increases to increase the fees for the water pollution control plan, unbeknownst to us. That gives me heartburn. We should have had all this information.
That's yours.
We should have had all this information well before we set the fee. So now we're coming into a part of the budget right now where we're in pressure to get the budget passed, and we're handed state regulation, we're handed organizational surveys that happened in 2015. Now, the Water Pollution Control Authority, under our own ordinances, Chapter 86, Section 852. Water Pollution Control Authority shall have prepared a budget setting forth estimates and revenues. This is our job to do. At the same time, not Public Works, we should be sitting in on the budget process so we know these things are coming up. And I am so upset about this because I was on the subcommittee. I helped set the rate with the rest of the subcommittee. I endorsed that rate, not knowing any of what is being brought before me tonight. And in that, I will not endorse this because of the way it was brought to us. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, or? Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, let me throw out, is the fee rate structure that group approved, does that cover
Yes.
all these costs?
it covers.
Even though he didn't know about them,
The-
it covers
I didn't
those
know
costs.
either.
The water pollution control, increase in operational cost is a little over $200,000 from year to year. And almost all of that is made up of these two extra people. So that is, and that $200,000 is included as part of the operational rates in that, among other things, debt service and capital and again, so on.
Can we contract it out till the work is done, as opposed to hiring 2 employees and paying for salary and benefits and negotiating until, I mean, to your point, we're going through a tremendous change down there. We're asking people for a pretty big fee hike. So before we hire full-time employees, I'd kinda like to know, if and when it's done, do we really A, need them, or B, do we need them somewhere else?
Well, I mean, I think to Jonathan's point, I mean, the information here says we need them.
So I'm saying, as a full-time, think we hire some consultants until we figure out if we wanna make them permanent employees, and then, unfortunately, we're negotiating benefits, and, which again, it's probably not played into the cost, over the next 5 years.
So that's your discretion to do what it is that you see fit. All we do is provide advice. But what I will tell you is, this chart says 26% of all overtime out of Public Works is related to water pollution control. I have sat, as often as I have been able, at the Joint Facilities Committee, both as it exists today and as it existed previously. And I, like you, sit at the council meeting. And since the JFK discussion has been before council, how many times have we heard people come before council and talk about the issue that the reason that we're in the position we're in with our facilities is because we don't maintain them? So, Councilor Arnone has a valid point. Shame on us for not calling this out when we made our budget presentation. That's on us. But the bottom line is that we can't continue to not increase costs today in exchange to delay and defer maintenance to drive up our expenses tomorrow. So, to Jonathan's point, what he's saying is look, we're getting ready to make a big upgrade, and that's just to the plant, never mind the number of lift stations and other issues that we have out there, and we still can't meet our maintenance obligation with what we have today. You're gonna make it bigger and better, and the maintenance obligation will still be there. So that's why we're making the recommendation. And I understand if you don't wanna vote for it, I understand if that's too much for any one person to bear in this budget package, we understand that.
I'm not arguing, I'm just asking, can we think of a different way of hiring employees, instead of hiring them where we have to, have to negotiate benefits, can we look to the consulting way of doing it, that's all I'm asking. I didn't say we didn't need it, I'm just saying, can we look a different way?
That we haven't looked at. I don't know if you have any comments on that. We haven't discussed that.
No, we haven't discussed that issue. One of the things is, it's like our lab person is also our lead guy. If you look on the surrounding towns, their lead guy is separate. My lead guy is getting 5 hours of overtime a week, which is almost $270 just in overtime. And his lab job is 8 hours. I get very few hours of actual duty from that. So he's maybe doing his lead job maybe a couple hours a day, and I'm doing the rest of it while it's taking away from my duties. So we're short-staffed on that part. That's not something that can be subbed out per se. It makes it very hard because I'm trying to watch a staff of 12 while my lead guy is doing legal lab work to make sure we're running correctly. If you look at the surrounding towns around us, Windsor Locks, East Windsor, Vernon, South Windsor, Suffield, those positions are separated. They are running the plant while the superintendent is trying to do paperwork, do capital projects, and other stuff like that. Also, those similar towns also have a separate laboratory person. That's all they do is lab and process control. Enfield has been getting a bargain for the last 15, 20 years about having the same person do both jobs, but it also has cost us trying to get stuff done, trying to schedule stuff. It's also one less person in the field making sure stuff is getting done because they're at the plant all the time. Positions like that
I'm
aren't.
not arguing, I'm just.
But to your
look at
point,
different
but
ways
yes,
opposed-
yes, but to your
Yeah.
point, there are vendors who do provide
Right.
support services on a contractual basis, so.
That's what I'm
We-
not asking,
Yeah.
whether,
No,
I'm
no,
just
no.
asking, can we look something different as opposed to, that's all I'm asking. Sorry, go ahead.
So, no,
Yeah.
and quickly, and Gina, it's really for the first time, so you go ahead, Gina, I'll
All
wait.
right, sorry, go ahead. That's
No,
not-
you didn't.
Counselor's call, sorry.
So I'm gonna end up asking a lot of the other department heads the same question. So I'm looking at your overtime total. So are you, cause it looks like you have about 100,000 or so on average each year, the last couple of years, give or take, for the WPC on overtime. That's what this chart, if I'm reading it right, looks like. So are you saying that if you get these 2 additional people, we're gonna realize some savings in this overtime?
It would be about, with the lab savings alone, it'd be about $20,000 in overtime on that.
And that's lab only,
A lot of
okay.
these call-outs are after hours.
Yeah. I mean, I understand, you can't get rid of it all, I get that. But it looks like about 100,000 or so each year in the last
Well,
couple of years.
That's what was budgeted. Usually it ends up being between 110 and 115 over the last 3 years.
Oh, yeah. Looking at bars, it says actual.
Yeah, we can
I'm
give you the
measuring,
exact
it's about,
numbers.
well, 110 is about 100, that's fine with me. I'm just asking in general, yes or no. What you're saying is you get these 2 people and you're gonna save overtime costs.
It will save some overtime
Okay.
costs, yes.
So the rest of the department heads, when it's my turn to ask y'all the same question, I wanna know how you can reduce, what do you need in order to reduce some of these overtime costs? Because they're crazy. So, but I'll get to that once we're done, poor Kevin.
No, I mean, because some of the other overtime costs you can't control, like snow removal, we can't control.
No,
when it snows.
I understand, we can't control the weather.
And
Let
the
me
other-
just give you the 5 years actual that we have. 102,000, 110,000, 124,000, 105,000, 127,000.
That is
And the budget's
about
100
100,000.
too, so we've been Yeah, it's a little more than 100.
So
You're right.
I don't wanna get on the overtime, but they work 7 days, so they work weekends on overtime, which is, you know, another thing you're not gonna get rid of. But back on the whole story of, you know, we're sitting here, holding the police to line on how many people they have in our police force. We're sitting here with discussions of layoffs. We're sitting here with discussions of mandated, furloughs, thank you. This just boggles my mind. And we have overtime studies that we implemented last year for a department. These things take time. These are other reasons why this board should meet more with just the water pollution control. So we can understand all this regulation, so we can make sure that we have our input on some of this regulation. This again, it's just tossed at us at a time of budget season when you couldn't have brought it up at a worse time. We're trying to preserve jobs here. And you know, as for overtime, as for things breaking down, I mean, a lot of this overtime, with God's will and $36 million, that we're gonna have new equipment that's not gonna break down every night. And that's gonna be a huge savings in itself. I'd like to see those projections before we go any further. So I'm really passionate about this. That's why it gives me heartburn, is because I'm gonna tell another department they're gonna furlough? I can't. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Suzak.
I guess, you know, listening to what you're saying, Tom, and everybody's saying, that we're not a 5-day-a-week business. And yet, all our labor is set up to be 5 days a week. It's like we should close down the town of Enfield and all go home on Friday at 5. All come back Monday at 8. I mean, this is the problem that we have, that no one has an understanding that we are a 7-day-a-week organization. We need to somehow have staffing that makes sense for 7 days a week. And I know it requires negotiations, I know it requires thinking out of the box, but I am sure other businesses that run 7 days a week, they don't run Sunday and Saturday on overtime. And even the amount of hours that we're here, we're not a 9 to 5. We're not a bank. Banks open, banks close. They even have the ATMs. So I don't know. I think we need to have as a total change in how we think about how we staff and how we do business, and the disconnect between those two things we have. Thanks.
Anyone else? Councilman Bosco?
I understand the point of needing these two people. What are they actually gonna do?
Right now, we've been inspected, want to take one down and pass it around, we were inspected by DEP 2 years ago approximately. We have 100 to 150 miles of trunk lines in the woods. We haven't maintained in over 15 years. We also have an additional 100 to 150 miles in the streets, which we don't inspect on a regular basis. We are supposed to be doing 20% of that a year. So every 5 years, you re-inspect your system. Currently, right now, we're maybe doing a couple miles on an emergency basis.
I guess where I sort of have a problem, and I'm gonna piggyback off of Tom, is if we knew this 2 years ago, why are we here now? Why didn't we do something 2 years ago?
I feel
But
like we
the
heard
big-
about this before.
No, I don't know, well, I heard we needed to do it, but I didn't hear we were mandated to do it. The next thing is, I mean, some of this work, I think, is gonna be much better done by a subcontractor, especially clearing all the lines with the woods. I mean, we're not only gonna need people to do that, it's not gonna be one guy and it's not gonna be two to clear the mains of all trees and stumps. You're gonna have to have a couple guys go in there, you're gonna need chippers, you're gonna need bobcats, you're gonna, cause especially some of the wet places you're gonna have to get into to do it, you're gonna need some specialized equipment, so, I mean, we do what we do very well, but there's certain things we should be doing with somebody else. And especially seeing, if we're just gonna do this quick overview of what we have now, the overtime we're paying for snow plowing, for repairs, and for everything that we have, it's still gonna be cheaper than 2 employees for now. So, I mean, I would like to see what, and to something Mike said, how much is it gonna cost us to get these sewer lines cleared by subcontractors? I think they can do it cheaper than we can.
And I agree with you. Clearing the sewer line is one thing, clearing out all of the old growth is one thing. Once it's all cleared out, we have money in our capital budget for a study to plan clearing out and vegetative management after that. But even still, the vegetative management will still require mowing at least once a year, but you're still avoiding doing TVing and cleaning the other 80% of your line that's in the street. We just can't get to that.
So to your point, we can also look at what it would cost to contract that. So whether or not it's
Yeah.
whether or not it's $200,000 in for employees, or whether or not it's $150,000 in contracting 7 lines down in the budget, the bottom line is that there's a need for additional resources to be able to maintain what we've got.
And you know, I'm okay with additional resources, I'm not okay with more people right now.
Sure, fair enough.
And if something needs to get done, like I said, sometimes a private contractor can do things a lot cheaper than us, cause they're not gonna have the costs associated with what needs to be done. And again, equipment, I mean, Rick's gonna need us, if he does that, to get some of them bobcats that can take trees down at 2 inches. Well, we don't have one right now. So you get someone that gets one of them big machines that'll take the trees down and mow them down. In 2 hours, he can clear a mile of vegetation, where if we send a couple guys in there with chainsaws, we'll be there forever. So there's things that other people can do, and it's whole town wide. We should be using contractors more for a lot of things than what we do, because it just makes sense. You don't need the equipment, you're not renting stuff. It's just, and there is no overtime. It's this much money for that job, you have this many days to do it, it's your problem how to get it done. And, I guess as I would much rather see that change to an allotment of money than employees right now. And it's just like, you know, what Tom says, I mean, this is pretty bad. We're telling people that they're gonna lose their job possibly, and, we're gonna hire more people.
But just to that point, I want to point out that this budget was not constructed to that. This budget was constructed to maintain the services that we
Absolutely.
currently have, because I have requested on numerous occasions direction from council and direction from leadership on what would be an appropriate budget, recognizing the fact that we were going to have financial issues coming into this budget cycle. And I was not provided any direction so that I could appropriately budget. So to say that we put these new employees in here so that we could lay off people, that's an incorrect statement.
No, that's not what I'm going to say. I don't mean it that way, but on the other thing is, we do have committees that should have been meeting. On Public Works, we had a meeting, but we had nothing to do with anything. We haven't had one budget meeting. Usually other years, we sit down and stuff like the 158 people that are getting garbage pickup would have been discussed at a Public Works subcommittee meeting. And when we came here, we wouldn't be sitting here like, oh, why are we doing 158 if we did what we should have done? And it's my fault too, because I should have pushed a little more, because I'm chair of that committee. But we should have been sitting down 4 months ago and a committee talking about some of these things.
I would like to point out that this is an unusual year. We spent an inordinate
I
amount of
know,
time.
you've got a lot of time trying to save money
Right,
from
for
the
the
other
previous
budget.
budget, so yes,
I
this would have been
understand.
a different process.
I
yes.
understand, it's just that it would have been a lot easier at a committee meeting, and going further, we need to remember, that's what we have the committees for, to guide things along and make things move easier for you and us. And, so we're not at the last minute deciding what we're gonna do with 158 people. That's it.
Anyone else have any questions? You guys have anything else? No, and I just think, as we end this, I think a little bit, just keep in mind, I think there's some of the frustration, especially the water pollution, I think, again, we're gonna have a public hearing, ask people for a huge, and I'm not saying, you have a council who's willing to make those tough decisions, right? But when we're not frank with people, again, hey, we're gonna hire 2 people in that process. And for me, again, I wanna make sure everything's on the table. Again, what grants have we already received from changing to a fee? You know, going from what used to be in our, you know, our taxes to a fee. That's valuable, and then, that's valuable along with, okay, do we have, I know we don't have it in writing from the state that they're gonna pay us the $2 million. We're telling people we were gonna ask you for a significant fee increase, which again, I think we're willing to do, but we're telling you it's gonna break even in 19. Well, okay, if we hire 2, I mean, we're trying to, from a perspective of hiring, I have no problem giving you the help, but I wanna think outside the box here, cause we need our unions to come to the table, or they're gonna have some drastic things that, oh, by the way, we're gonna hire 2 other people. So I'm saying, look at the juxtaposition we're trying to figure out here. And if you need people, start looking at some different ways as opposed to just simply hiring, and now we have to negotiate with them that maybe they're not willing to negotiate with us to make the changes that need to be made. And I think the other thing is we just need more, this goes back to when we do things in a water pollution plant, it's gotta be part of our auditing process. And I'm saying we need to include it. We need to understand where we are on some of these things, me personally. So then when we say to people in 2019, you know, hey, look, we did all these changes, but this did not occur, so we're gonna ask you for more money. There's some trust with the public, that I think that's part of it. Not saying it's on you guys, just the process, the way this is shaken out. Where again, there's not enough detail on some of the, you know, the devil's in the details type thing, where we can report on it. So again, we can defend some of this stuff. So we're not just here picking on you, but we need some of this information so we can defend it. And I think that's a little bit of the frustration. I don't wanna speak for other folks, but for me personally, I wanna look into subcontract out if we can. Until we figure out how we're gonna handle the next negotiation cycle, which is gonna be difficult, I just don't personally wanna be hiring anyone on a full, you know, other than if we can avoid it unless we're subcontracting. It's my opinion.
And I'm just speaking for myself,
Yeah.
and I don't feel anyone's picking on anybody.
No, but
We're
again, it's
just
just, yeah.
trying to have a full disclosure of what's in the
But I think
budget.
you can just see
We're not
a little bit of the
hiding
frustration.
anything,
I'm not
and
saying you are, but
you're frustrated there, but we're frustrated that
But
we're
yeah, I
trying
mean,
to get stuff
you
done and
just-
we can't.
I know, you
That
just
we don't
think,
have
though,
the
when you're
people or the
asking-
this, that's why we had this management study, we're hoping they're gonna come
My
up and
point, Jonathan,
look
is-
at Public Works and say,
was done before budget.
yes, I know, we
But I mean, you
say,
gotta,
you know, you need this, or you're structured like that, or you should spend more time here, less time here, I mean,
but
that's
if
what
you got 2 employees in part of your presentation, that's gotta be disclosed to the subcommittee. That's all I'm saying. I understand the frustration. That's all I'm saying. Go ahead.
I'm gonna change horses here, get off WPC. I was at the CROG meeting today, looking at their list of projects. And the only thing that Enfield had on there was, you know, the bike path going from the Suffield 190 bridge up to Enfield Street and then down to Town Hall or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself,
$750,000.
we should be looking to more grants or more utilization of CROG, submitting more projects. I think John Kavimbo said something like, you did Freshwater Boulevard on a CROG grant. And I don't know if you've done any others with a CROG grant, but we should be constantly throwing things into the pot. Maybe we won't get them, but if you don't get it this year, you throw it again next year, and hopefully you can get it then. And I've gone to meetings now for about 4 months, and I don't hear too much about Enfield on any of those lists.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
For a second? First of all, I think Enfield's done pretty well with the grants. Freshwater Boulevard was a success. Donald was the mastermind of that. It was $1 million, Donald. I mean, and that was a great project. And so every time we do a grant, we need to hire someone to help us put it together, okay? So that's a factor. And then there's quite a bit of administrative work on our end that and without going into details, so what we had in Public Works was we had well-intentioned staff who was responding to council requests for grants. Go for this grant, go for that grant. Well, they went and started putting these grants and talking to other towns, and there was no process. It was the wild, wild west, and most of these grants fell apart. Because I didn't even know what was going on till all of a sudden I'm gonna go, this hasn't been approved by the council, this wasn't signed off by the town manager, because it wasn't their responsibility or really their job to do that, it was mine, but there was just too much stuff flying around, so we have a process now before anyone applies for a grant, CROG or anywhere else, they need to come to me and explain how much time is gonna be involved in applying and administering and doing the grant. And if we can do it, we do it. And if we can't, we don't, because it's a waste of resources to pursue things that we can't manage and implement. But we have done it, CROG, and I think Donald doesn't go, but John Cabibbo's been going to the CROG meetings, yes. And that's part of it. We wanna keep tabs, yes. We wanna make sure we know what the grants are, but, you know, we don't have anyone whose job is to do grants in public works.
So
And
sure.
we do get grants that come across the desk, and like, sorry, we can't apply, we don't have the people. It's frustrating, but that happens. You're not always gonna get them anyway, but.
Well, see, you're not the only group that could do the grants, and I don't know if you've talked with your staff about this, about what can we do? Do we need a full-time grant writer? Would that help? Could we get a grant writer that, whatever they saved, paid their salary, so it didn't cost us anything, but yet it brought in money to do all these projects?
So, what I can tell you is this. To what you've heard tonight, what we've talked about a lot tonight. So we're gonna hire a contractor to do this, and we're gonna hire a contractor to do that, and we're gonna apply for all these grants. This organization has done an incredibly good job of making sure that, as we call it, there's lots of feet in the street. But you did that at the consequence at the top. And so now what you have is you have an organization that has so many feet in the street where the span of control is limited. And now you're asking administration, leadership to do more. And there isn't a capability at our level to do more. We are at a maximum level of work. So we don't need to hire a grant writer. Most of staff here is capable in their respective professional area to do what it is that they need to do. What we don't have is we don't have the time to do the critical thinking to the point of what is the analysis. Should we hire this contractor? Is that better than hiring this person? Can we get more for less? You know, a great statistic which would, which should come in, but it isn't part of this discussion, and I didn't think of it until 10 minutes ago, for all of these sewer claims that come in, the sewer line backs up at someone's house, they submit a claim to the town pays that. We're largely self-funded in those capacities. So what's the trade-off if we did more inspections, if we had fewer backups, if we paid fewer backups and reduced overtime, what's that? I don't have time to do that. He didn't have time to do that. Kevin doesn't have time to do that. That's where we're starting to fail as an organization. And so these are all things that we want to do for you. These are all these tasks, all these things we want to accomplish, but we are stretched to the ability we can't do them. So yes, there is more grant money out there for us to be able to take advantage of at some point, but we don't have the resources to consistently apply for it. And if we do apply for it and successfully receive it, we don't have the necessary resources to administer the grant. And that's just the simple truth. So we'd like to do more. We do what we can with what we have. Could we do more with more? Yes. But that's not for us to decide.
The thought was that if you got a grant writer, or you got the grant, that the grant would pay for all these things you're talking about here. I don't know if that's the case, true or not. But I would think that the grant would pay whatever the services that you need to do, design or whatever.
In some
Administer.
instances, in some instances they do, and other instances they don't. It depends on the particular grant.
So it's not totally out of the question to have the grant writer write grants enough so that he justifies his or her job. The grants pay for the job because they saved all this money, and then the grant money comes in and the grants administer the cost of running the program.
That assumes that the grant is operational in nature. So in his case, you would have a grant that would provide it would offset certain expenses related to engineering, or it would offset certain expenses related to project inspection, but it's not an ongoing dollar. So it's not an ongoing project. So it's one and done for project X. And then if there's no project Y, well then whoever that engineer is, that additional engineer we've hired, or whoever that additional grant writer is, but there's no revenue stream to cover that particular individual.
They get another
So-
grant, and then another grant to help pay their salary.
So, but like.
That's their justification, their sole reason for being there.
Yes, that is one of the benefits to having a grant writer, but understand that the source of most grant monies are other tax-driven entities like the state, which doesn't have any money, or like the federal government, which is rerouting its money, but also other communities who would not normally be in competition with Enfield for grants are now becoming our competitors in the grant market. So, yes, to your point, in theory, a grant writer might be able to pay for themselves, but today, even from when I started, the market for grants is extremely competitive compared to what it was. And the on-staff grant writers whose salaries are paid for by portions of their grants, that's not something that's very common anymore in this profession.
I know Jean Hoy does a great job of writing grants.
Yes, but that's not Jean's job.
But she does.
But again, that's not her
Most of her
full-time job.
organization is paid for with grants.
Deputy Mayor Suzak.
Okay, now you talk about the grant that we received. Is that the LoSiP grant that we used for the freshwater?
We use lots of.
Okay, I always get them confused. I mean, it's one or the other. The bike path is the other one. How do we implement, I know Donald, you're way over there, come over here, because I have a question that so you're saying that Freshwater Boulevard, we got the grant from the state, and that's the, what was $1 million?
Yes, that was for.
How do we implement that into our roads program so it actually becomes money that's over the CIP limit that we can spend in our, because that becomes part of our roads, right?
Right, Freshwater Boulevard was part of this, was part of the referendum, so that's how we able to, when we got the money in, that's how we were able to use it for.
Right, because that's another problem we have with grants, that we get grants, we get monies, and they exceed the referendum limit. We have a referendum coming up in November, which is federal money, which is what, $5 million or $2 million? What is it, Brian? Help me out here.
It's in that ballpark.
Yeah, it's above the threshold, how's that?
It's substantially above the threshold, and we will have to go out to referendum to the people of Enfield to ask their permission to spend federal money that we've received through grant writing. So it's a double-edged sword that, you know,
Our
we.
charter.
Right, that we do something, and now we have difficulty spending it. So that's a grant, and then the other one is the one that Peter was talking about, that's the bike path. And those are two things that you came before council for us to approve. And I know you always look for things that it's what they're looking for us to ask for in terms of grants too. So we do a good job of getting our grants. I'm sure there's others out there, but there's a lot that's done. And because that one fell under our roads, we could spend that without going out secondarily to ask for a referendum.
That would hold true to the whole roads program. Why aren't we looking for more money to support the
They
roads
do every
program?
year.
Yeah, they were asked.
Councilman Bosco.
Yeah, town-wide, I'm just curious, how many supervisors do we have? And how many, on like, the people that are here now? And how many lead persons do we have total? You know, I mean, I'm talking town-wide, from social services to every department we had. I'd like to know how many we have in, for everything. How many supervisors, how many lead persons? And I'd like to know the count of the people that we have for employees, and where does that set in the private sector? You know, are we really miserably failing compared to the private sector as we are in the municipal sector? It's just, I'm sorry, I think we're over with supervisors. I think we're too top-heavy. And I've thought that right along, and I know you, Brian, and one thing I do have to say, you've got a pretty straightforward mind, so I really do respect you telling me that we're not top-heavy, we're just the opposite. but I'd like to see something, because in my eyes, I don't see it. I mean, realistically, we have, what, 10 people here that are supervisors that all take care of something with Public Works or some type of funding in for the thing, and I just, for me, I'd like to see the proof that shows that we are not top-heavy, we're the other way, like you said.
So, understand that to do what it is that we do, right, to just go out and make sure that that project gets done, or that street gets plowed, or that grass gets mowed, we're appropriately staffed to do that, okay? But if you want us to be, I hate the phrase, but if you want us to be proactive, right, you want us to start doing creative and innovative thinking, and you want us to do more analysis to tell you where we might be able to save money or how we could change services to do more with less. We're not equipped to do that,
Well, I'm glad
staff-wise.
I asked the question, because I just hear it and I'm going, wait a minute now, we have, just in Public Works, a whole room full of people that are, and, you know, why can't one help the other, and, you know, that's what we would do in the private sector, I mean, so, I understand where you're coming from now.
So, right, so to do what we do today, we're properly staffed. To do something different than we have today, to be that more avant-garde, that proactive, we need to change structure or add structure at the top.
Okay,
That's-
thank you.
Sure.
Councilman Ungar.
Okay, backing up a little bit, this year, we're not really in the position to hire new people. We're looking, considering furlough days, layoffs, all that. But I was thinking of what Kevin was saying, and if he actually can't do his job, that he's gotta run around and try to fill these gaps, and he can't do his job, maybe they really need someone. Not just, oh yeah, I'd like to have somebody. Maybe he really needs the help. And isn't there some wiggle room that we could look at it closer and see if there's something that we could do to help him?
Well, I think that at least what we're planning to do is we're gonna look at, you know, what the alternative option is, rather than hiring employees, could we hire a contractor, could we hire a Viola Environmental or someone to, you know, assist? So there may be additional cost, but it might not be that cost, but it might be no cost at all.
That is the point of the Water Pollution Control Authority. We should know those things. We should know the detail. We should listen to the employees. We should visit the plant. We should look at those things. I know I just totally slam this all the time. But we have a responsibility of it too. If we don't know what's going on in the budget, how can we possibly know what's going on in the plant?
It's a huge organization.
You know, Tom,
That's why they
and
make
to your
it
point,
authority.
and we don't know about poop.
You're gonna learn real quick.
Right,
And most
and-
towns have
and-
regular citizens on there.
Exactly, so that's why we need a little more information.
Right, exactly, that's all I'm saying. Without the proper information, things
All I
like
know
this
is I
happen.
go like this,
And it
and it's
goes.
gone.
And that's the same with everything else. Roads get plowed, we wake up, we drive out. We try to do our job, and that's why they separate these two large parts of Public Works and make a commission to begin with. They wouldn't have made a water pollution control with its own ordinance that are probably 10 pages long, so we could ignore them.
This should be out of town council's hands.
You would be doing the whole world a favor. And I honest to God believe
Because when
that
you
since
wear
the
two
day I took
hats,
this
it's
job.
hard to-
It's hard to do.
Because, you know, I don't know, you know, all I know is I got one budget I wanna take care of.
And that's why I'm trying to bring this to light with this council here, especially, that every time something like this comes up, we're not prepared to answer it because we don't have the time. We would have to meet once a month just for that, and that's just the minimum of any other town that has this process, once a month. They're gonna review the budget, they review the billing.
All the subcommittees should meet once a month.
Thanks, Donna.
They do.
I'm trying to get the work off you. She makes us meet once a week.
Well, they should. I mean, some of you were on Board of Ed. You know they meet once a month.
So I think you're good. We need to get the CIP, so thank you, Jonathan, and your team.
You can stay right there, Mr. CIP. Do you wanna make a presentation?
No, you can start.
Oh, I can start, okay. All right. So, I'll let Jonathan address all of the detail. But included in your book should be at the back, it's 4 pages long. The initial CIP that came out was only 2 pages. Our apologies, there was a confusion between front and back, but there is actually 4. The CIP, again, this year looks incredibly similar to what it did last year. The intent is, again, to provide capital acquisitions through the use of financing as opposed to cash. And if we can appropriately plan our acquisitions, if we can appropriately plan financing, effectively what happens is as the plan unfolds, costs begin to steadily increase, but once they reach a certain level, they plateau out. From what you've seen previously, there are a couple of new additions within the budget. The CIP, the capital non-reoccurring, and I will call out what I think are the 3 most important items, and those are the creation of the sinking funds. There are, again, 3 of them. There is one for the town of Enfield proper, there is one for the Board of Education, and then there is one for what we are referring to as public infrastructure. The way that sinking funds work is they are established by town council as an ordinance, so they're very public, more so than a typical resolution might be, in that there's a public hearing and that citizens are given an opportunity to come and comment. That ordinance defines what the sinking fund can be spent, the revenues in the sinking fund, the monies in the sinking fund can be spent on. So under the town of Enfield, we would define it as plant, property, and equipment. So these would be large capital expenditure items. These would be large air conditioning units, doors and windows and those types of things, anything that makes up a building, if you will. What happens then is we apply one deposit to the sinking fund, and then as relevant expenses are incurred by the town, they're simply charged to that account, and only qualified expenses get charged to the account. If you look back in previous CIPs, and the technical term, by the way, is capital non-reoccurring. So these expenditures are supposed to be limited to about 3-year segments. In the capital non-reoccurring from years past, the CIP from years past, you will see school roofs, and there's a line item that runs across, and then below that there's town building roofs, and there's a line item that runs across. So rather than call out these individual expenditures, they're just established in these sinking funds. And so as you need the money for the qualified expense, you spend the money for the qualified expense. Another benefit to the sinking fund is that unlike the capital non-reoccurring, our current CIP, the way that it works is every 3 years, if there's no money being expended from that particular line item, the revenues return, the dedicated monies return back to the general fund for use by the town. Once the money is in the sinking fund, it stays in the sinking fund and it continues to grow in perpetuity, whatever the amount is. So it's kind of almost a, you want to call it a safeguard from the town being able to change its mind later on. So it's a true dedication to the expense. And then last but not least with the sinking fund is that it takes another ordinance to remove or to close out the sinking fund. So whereas in the current capital non-reoccurring, council can simply pass a resolution and move the money from Board of Education roofs to Town of Enfield roofs, and it's done like that. To close out a sinking fund requires another ordinance, it requires another public hearing, it requires more public notification. So in the event that the town were to choose not to utilize sinking funds anymore, it would be much more apparent that the town was going to do that. So if there was concern from the citizen, they would be able to have that opportunity to come and address the town council. So there are a couple of benefits to utilizing the sinking fund. So that's why those are in there, to kind of begin addressing our needs with respect to our capital equipment, with our capital assets. Beyond that, the structure of the CIP looks relatively similar to what you saw last year, and is effectively a cut and paste, if you will. We did run into several issues last year trying to implement our CIP because of the state budget cuts. So this will be more of a reboot. We did get a couple of, we'll call them test cases on the docket this year. So we're going to be in a better position to implement our financing strategy than we were this year. But that is the CIP in a nutshell. So more than happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Just a clarification, I want to open it up. So on the sinking fund, so this is this money moved from the fund balance, or is this simply, to your point,
Yes, it's removed from the fund balance into a separate fund.
Right. So dumb question, if it's come from fund balance, does it show up as a liability on the books? Or an impact of, how does it show up in,
No, so it wouldn't come from fund balance. It is a separate fund apart from the general fund. So you would make a scheduled transfer, an appropriated transfer every year as a one-time expense from the general fund to the sinking fund.
So I didn't say it right?
Correct. Well, what it would end up being is similar to the way the CNR transfers are made now, their capital transfer. It would be part of that, it would add to it, but rather than going into our CNR fund, it would go into these new funds, these new sinking funds. They would be separate funds that, I'm not completely sure the actual financial reporting on it right now.
Right, that's right. So the initial money wouldn't come from the fund balance?
Well, the money would come out of.
Fund
Yes,
balance?
it would
Okay.
come out of fund balance, it would show up, if you're looking at the financial statement.
Right, so
there's,
say you're
you
at
have
just
your
say
total
$1 million
expenses.
and you're $1 million less, if you're using round
Right,
numbers.
yes.
Right, okay, thank you. Yep,
Yep.
sorry. Open up the questions. Thank you. Counselor Scott. Or Counselor Bosco.
Joey.
I love the idea of the sinking fund, and I know we tried before to do something like this, and we were always told we couldn't do it. So this is definitely something if we can do, correct?
So I can't recall the citation off the top of my head, but the Connecticut General Statute does say that municipalities can set up sinking funds.
And we were told we couldn't, or we would have maybe done something a long time ago on this. So I think it's a good idea that we do have a sinking fund. I think it's a good start to get some things done.
Deputy Mayor Suzak.
I guess I'm looking at the financing of roofs. And I'm looking at particularly the Henry Barnard roof, and I see $322,600 to go in 2020 or 29. It's not even in next year's, this coming budget. I have a 31-year-old roof. I think this is a fine game plan when I have a 20-year roof, and I think it's gonna last for 25 years. But when I have a 31-year roof, and I know it's not gonna last because it's not lasting right now. And here we go, we're back on high-level thinking. How do I fix this?
Well, I think we're not putting money aside. This is the money to pay for the financing. So the
Okay, this is-
actual repair of the roof would be done, in this case, in fiscal year 2020. And then the
Okay.
payments would be made out over
Okay.
until it's
All right,
done.
so I'm misinterpreting this.
Right. So there's the assumption is that that matter would go to referendum
Okay.
this year, and then, or in 2020, and then the payments would start and the repair would be made in whatever year that the measure was approved.
Okay, all right. So I thought we were allocating that to the CIP consecutively in the year, and it
Right.
was not.
So if you look and I'll make sure that the 15-year plan is provided, but if you look at the broader 15-year plan, there is a specific line item to fund roof repair on all 6 of the elementary schools.
Okay, all right. And that can become rolling, because as the state money comes in.
Correct, and that's how they're designed.
Okay. All right, so you're still telling me I gotta go out to referendum for,
Correct, for the project, yes.
This year?
So you can't fund a little at a
I
time?
should've went 3 years ago, which I
So-
didn't
You
do.
can start repairs a little at a time.
Well, so you could, but remember the appropriation limit is, in round numbers, the appropriation limit is $600,000. So $600,000 to the sinking fund, you can't make an individual $600,000 for this roof, $600,000 for that roof. The total appropriation cannot exceed $600,000. So part of the reason that the appropriations are set the way that they're set, at least with respect to the CIP and the sinking funds, is because we were trying to control the overall expense growth. So when we had fully funded those transfers from capital non-reoccurring to sinking fund, we originally funded them at $580,000. Well, when we did that, that was an extra $1.25 million or something like that, $1.5 million that that turned out to add to what's already a $3.5 million proposed increase.
So, as you all know, I get privy to looking at how other school systems do their roofs. It's not unusual to do partial roof replacements, and people don't go up to referendum for this. They do it within their financial, and I guess, we're looking at a high school right now, it's going, renovate to new. You look at the roof system, they're all over the roof, it's all been done in different time frames. I just, we've already had a referendum fail that had elementary roofs.
Unfortunately, the issue
Yeah.
is we've got more stuff broke than we've got money to fix it. And that's
Yep.
the bottom line.
Yep, so I guess we're gonna have to all do some high-level thinking. Thank you, Brian, for pointing that out to us.
Was there one legal issue that you had to, that we were trying to sew up at one point? Wasn't there one legal, did we get over that hurdle? I don't know if it was about name of it, or it just comes to mind.
So we pulled out, so the initial legislation is drafted. It was sent down to the town attorney's office to review. The technical language came back, I think it was late last week, that the town attorney has signed off on the technical language of the legislation. John was looking into how to better define PP&E and other capital expenditures to bring that scope into a tighter issue. So we should be all set to introduce all of this legislation together on the 21st of May, based on what we've gotten back from the town attorney's office again. Last week, I think Deb said those came in, and based on what John's trying to do right now with respect to the general accounting standards.
Great, thank you. That's thinking out of the box we need in this one here, because it's that lockbox, can't rate it. Better than
It's a good thing.
CIP, it's a good thing, yeah,
And you can
Any other
spend it on the
questions?
project you need to.
absolutely.
Not only a question if we do this, I just like to make, when you do this, that some little blurb that we're gonna report on it, even if the auditors don't, make a, we're gonna comment on it, we're gonna put it in the legislation, that we're gonna comment on it. So again, everything is up, on the up and up of where the money stays in there, what's it supposed to be for. So it doesn't turn into what many years ago it turned into. So I'd rather just put that right in the legislation, so it's up front. So the purpose of that money is exactly what it's there for.
And it's in the cover
Right.
legislation.
Perfect, yep. Go ahead.
And when it is moved out, explain to people that, if you do dissolve a sinking fund, there is still a means to do that.
Right,
Because
correct.
people will worry about that, that is a concern.
Right. So, to create a sinking fund requires the passage of an ordinance, so to effectively close out a sinking fund would require an ordinance as well. So then that legislation would brought before council, there would be a required public hearing, notice would have to be held. The return of that money to the general fund or to wherever the council would deem it appropriate would have to be disclosed at that time. So, there would still be an accounting of where that money went in the event that council determined that the sinking fund was no longer necessary, or that maybe a sinking fund should be subdivided. Those opportunities are still there to be able to move that money, but again, for full disclosure to the public, the hurdles are more burdensome with respect to public notification and public disclosure, so.
Last question, we didn't purchase any vehicles, right, for the, did we do any police cars or any public works vehicles before the austerity measures?
There was a few small packages that went out, and there's another one that's getting ready, that just came back. So John, I don't know if you wanna talk to that real quick.
The only packages that we issued this year were for two packages for 3 DPW trucks and for the pond dredging and for the truck wash. We got the RFPs were due last week. I spent most of today reviewing them. Got a couple questions for our bond counsel, and we should be issuing those within the next month.
So that's the answer, no on police cruiser.
No
No,
police
not this year.
cruisers, sorry.
Thank you. I think that's it. Have a motion to adjourn, or do we have anything before we do that, Brian, for next, anything you wanna?
No, I don't think, we've got too much in advance of, I think Wednesday night is, the last of it. It's gonna be mostly the administrative, the smaller departments all grouped together.
So I wanna thank everyone for being here. I understand, you know, again, these are decisions that have to be talked about and debated in public, so we appreciate your patience, appreciate your expertise, and we thank you for coming. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
By Counselor Falk. Counselor Arnall, all those in favor?
All right.
Passes unanimously.